A broke nurse helped a man dressed in rags. She had no idea who he really was. Days later, he shows up with a proposal that changes everything. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Chloe Watson gripped the handle of her flimsy umbrella as a bitter gust threatened to turn it inside out. Rain pelted down on the street outside the Central Hospital in Chicago, the wind whipping her dark brown hair free from the loose bun she'd hastily pulled together at the end of her shift. She paused at the hospital's entrance, exhausted after 12 straight hours of running between patients' rooms, checking vitals and offering gentle words of comfort. Her workday had drained her both physically and emotionally, yet there remained a familiar warmth in her eyes, an empathy that had become her trademark. At 29 years old, Chloe carried the burden of a mountain of student loans she hardly dared to look at. When she left her small town for nursing school, the idea of debt felt distant, like a hazy storm cloud on the horizon. But that storm cloud had long since unleashed its downpour, following her each month with relentless interest fees and strict payment deadlines. Her studio apartment, a cramped space she could barely afford, had been paid for late more than once, and her fridge was nearly empty. Still, she woke up every morning determined to bring a glimmer of hope to her patients. As she stepped onto the slick sidewalk, the building's automatic doors swishing closed behind her, Chloe sensed a prickling in her bones, a signal she should hurry home. The wind roared like a distant train. Cars splashed through the puddles along the street, their headlights revealing patches of water creeping along the hospital's front steps. Chloe pulled her jacket tighter and took measured steps toward the corner. That was when she saw him. A man, perhaps in his mid-30s, slumped against the wall by the hospital entrance. His once grey hooded sweatshirt was stained and tattered, and his hair stuck to his forehead, damp from the rain. He trembled violently, hugging his knees close to his chest. He looked up, startled by the shuffle of Chloe's footsteps, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes locked. She noticed a hint of blue in his gaze, bright even in the dimly lit street. Chloe felt her heart contract, everything else, the freezing downpour, her mounting bills, the ravenous hunger in her stomach, faded into the background of her mind. Here was someone plainly suffering, and she couldn't just walk away. She knelt beside him, her jeans soaking up the water beneath her, ignoring the chill running through her body. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, trying to study his face without prying. He looked at her, lips quivering. "I'm fine," he stammered, though he clearly wasn't. She offered a tentative smile. "My name is Chloe. I'm a nurse here." She shrugged out of her light jacket and pressed it into his hands. "Take this." For a second, he hesitated, as though uncertain if he should accept a stranger's kindness. Finally, he murmured, "Thank you." His voice cracked, and a wave of compassion washed over Chloe. She couldn't imagine how cold and hungry he must be. She rummaged through her satchel, pulling out a half-eaten sandwich she'd saved for dinner. "It's not much," she said softly, holding it out, "but please take it." He glanced at the offering, conflicting emotions passing over his face. Eventually, his hunger overcame any pride, and he accepted it with trembling fingers. She could see his breath come in shallow gasps. The hospital staff around them hurried to the parking lot, some looking with mild curiosity, most rushing to go home. My name's Tyler," he offered between bites. Even without the battered clothes and soaked shoes, he had an unusual air about him. Something almost refined, despite his disheveled appearance, yet Chloe didn't have the luxury to dwell on that subtle impression. The man was shivering too hard to stand properly, so she slipped an arm around his shoulders to help him up, worried he might collapse. The moment Chloe steadied him, Tyler's eyes rolled back. He went limp and slumped against her. Alarmed, Chloe quickly pressed her fingers to his neck, finding a rapid but faint pulse. Her own heart pounded as she realized he needed immediate medical attention, no matter the hospital's protocol on admitting homeless patients without insurance. Letting him lie there was not an option. "Hang on," she whispered, her voice urgent. "I'm taking you inside." Somebody nearby called out, "Hey, nurse, do you need help?" A security guard approached, ready to intervene. Chloe nodded, relieved. With the guard's help, she half-carried, half-dragged Tyler toward the lobby doors. As they entered, a few nurses cast wary glances. One of them, Lisbeth Reynolds, the stern nurse supervisor, frowned deeply at the sight of the unconscious man. Chloe felt her chest tighten, anticipating a reprimand. She was already well aware of the strict rules that often prevented indigent patients from receiving certain forms of care. But none of that mattered in the face of a human life that needed saving. She inhaled, summoning the strength that had carried her through every challenge in her life thus far, and gently lowered Tyler onto a gurney. A doctor was summoned, while Lisbeth asked a barrage of questions Chloe couldn't fully answer. All she knew was that, in the midst of a thunderous Chicago storm, she had encountered a stranger in desperate need. And she had just changed her own life by deciding he was worth fighting for. Chloe's pulse still raced when she finally stepped away from the gurney where Tyler lay. The emergency physician on duty, Dr. K. Norris, was examining him under the harsh fluorescent lights. Lisbeth Reynolds, arms crossed, fixed Chloe with a look that sent a chill through her. Rainwater dripped off Chloe's hair and onto the tiles, forming a small puddle beneath her feet. She realized she was shivering now, too, her adrenaline fading into the raw exhaustion of a double shift. "Chloe," Lisbeth said in a low, even tone, "you know the protocol. We can't just take in anyone off the street who faints outside our door." Chloe bristled, but kept her voice calm. "I'm aware, Lisbeth, but he was in distress. He passed out. Do you want to see someone suffer hypothermia on our doorstep?" Lisbeth's frown deepened. She eyed Tyler, who was now stirring slightly, letting out a faint moan, and then returned her stern gaze to Chloe. "We'll treat him tonight, obviously. But we have guidelines for follow-up. The hospital administration isn't generous about free care. You'll need to fill out an incident report." Chloe gave a weak nod. Paperwork was the least of her worries. She stepped closer to Tyler, noticing that his eyes fluttered open briefly. He looked momentarily disoriented. She wanted to ask him questions. Where did he come from? Did he have any family to contact? But Dr. Norris gestured for her to wait outside. Once in the corridor, Chloe leaned against the wall, her mind spinning. The clang of metal trays and the low hum of urgent conversations filled the hallway. She saw Sabrina Moore, a friendly face in a sea of tired staff, approach with a knitted brow. "Chloe, are you all right?" Sabrina asked softly, handing her a clean towel. "You're soaked." Chloe nodded her thanks, dabbing at her hair. "I'll be fine. I just found him out there, barely conscious. I couldn't leave him." Sabrina's expression revealed concern and empathy. "I know. You've always been the kind of person who steps in when everyone else walks away." Chloe let out a sigh, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly with her friend's comforting tone. "Now I'm worried I might have made a problem for myself. Lisbeth is upset, and we both know how the administration can be, but how could I turn my back on him?" Sabrina offered a faint smile. "You did the right thing, even if it stirs trouble." She hesitated. "This man, did he say anything to you before he fainted?" "He said his name was Tyler," Chloe replied, recalling his quiet, intense blue gaze. "Honestly, I got the sense there's more to him than meets the eye." "But I couldn't let him freeze out there?" Lisbeth's sharp heels clicked on the floor as she strode by, reminding them both that the nurse supervisor wasn't done, only temporarily occupied by other duties. Sabrina moved closer, dropping her voice. I'll try to cover for you if needed. This might blow over if we handle it carefully. Thank you, Chloe whispered, genuinely grateful. Sabrina had always been a loyal colleague, and tonight it felt like her friendship was a lifeline. An hour later, Chloe stood at the nurse's station, scanning Tyler's temporary chart. Dr. Norris's notes indicated signs of malnutrition and mild hypothermia, but no immediate life-threatening conditions. Tyler was stable for the moment. Chloe typed up a brief statement about finding him outside. She omitted the detail of giving him her dinner or her jacket, figuring that was personal. Once finished, she placed the paperwork in the designated folder. With the last wave of her shift behind her, she considered whether to check on Tyler again or head home for a few hours of sleep. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she needed to speak to him. Inside the small exam room, she found him half awake, eyes drowsy from the warming fluids administered to him. His damp hair had dried a little, revealing that it was slightly lighter in color than she'd initially thought. He turned his head at her approach. You, he murmured, voice still shaky. Thanks. Chloe lowered her voice. I'm just glad you're okay. Do you remember what happened out there in the rain? He swallowed, the dryness in his throat evident. I was just tired, real tired, he managed to say, his brow creased, as if he were deciding how much to reveal. She wanted to ask him more, but the beep of her pager shattered the moment. Lisbeth was requesting her presence in the nurse supervisor's office immediately. Chloe felt her stomach clench, knowing this conversation might lead to reprimands or even a threat to her job. She glanced at Tyler one last time, noticing that his eyes, although weary, held a kind of calm acceptance, almost as if he expected obstacles. I'll be back, she promised, not certain if she'd be allowed. As she left, the soft glow of the hospital's fluorescent lights flickered behind her. The heavy sense of having crossed a line she couldn't uncross weighed on her, and for the first time all night, she questioned whether she was strong enough to handle what lay ahead. Chloe quietly shut the door to the nurse supervisor's office, forcing herself to take steady breaths before turning to face Lisbeth Reynolds. The office was cramped, with filing cabinets lining two of its walls, and the single window offered a view of the rain still drumming against the asphalt outside. Lisbeth sat behind a metal desk, tapping a pen against her open notebook. Sit down, Lisbeth instructed, her tone carefully controlled. She waited for Chloe to take the chair across from her. I've read your incident report, and I spoke to Dr. Norris about the man you brought in. Yes, Tyler, Chloe said softly, folding her hands in her lap. Lisbeth lifted an eyebrow. We don't have any details on him. No insurance, no address, no emergency contacts. I appreciate your concern, but you understand we can't let him stay indefinitely without proper documentation. This is a private facility, not a homeless shelter. Chloe nodded, though inside she felt torn. He was in immediate danger, Lisbeth. I couldn't just walk away. I'm not disputing your motives, Lisbeth replied, but this hospital has strict policies. From this point on, follow standard procedure. If he needs extended care, social services has to be involved. Do you understand? Of course, Chloe said, though she inwardly bristled. It struck her as callous that their first instinct was to worry about costs and paperwork rather than the man's well-being. Lisbeth exhaled. I'm not trying to be the villain here, Chloe. You're one of our best nurses. Your patient satisfaction scores are outstanding. Just remember, we have rules. Don't risk your career by bending them too far. Leaving the office, Chloe mulled over Lisbeth's words. She knew the supervisor was only doing her job, yet it pained her that the system was so rigid. At times, the entire bureaucratic framework felt like a wall standing between her and the compassion she wanted to offer freely. At the end of the corridor, she caught sight of Sabrina, who motioned for her to come over. "How did it go?" her friend asked, concern etched across her face. "I won't be fired," Chloe said, forcing a half smile, "but I'm on thin ice. We have to contact social services if Tyler needs more than a short stay." Sabrina touched her arm. "That's better than nothing. At least you weren't written up." Chloe shrugged. "I hate that helping someone can lead to disciplinary action. It makes me feel guilty for caring." A short while later, she headed to the break room, her body craving a moment of rest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she slumped into a chair, ignoring the stale smell of coffee. Her thoughts drifted to Tyler. She wondered if he had somewhere to go once the hospital discharged him. A wave of doubt washed over her. She remembered the exhaustion in his eyes, the faint tremble when he tried to speak. What if he returned to the cold streets? She was so lost in thought that she barely noticed Dr. Victor Harris stepping in. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a kindly demeanor that set him apart from the more stern physicians. He'd known Chloe's father years ago, and though they rarely spoke about it, there was a paternal warmth in the way he addressed her. "Chloe," Dr. Harris greeted, taking the seat next to her. "I heard about the newcomer. How are you holding up?" She sighed, rubbing her temple. "I'm worried about him. He has nowhere to go, no one to help him. But I also don't want to lose my job if the administration thinks I'm crossing a line." Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Medicine is about rules, but it's also about humanity. You can do both. Keep your job and care for the man. Sometimes you just have to tread carefully." She managed a small smile. "Thanks. I appreciate that." He laid a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet reassurance. "I've been around long enough to know compassion is scarce. Don't let the system harden you." Their conversation was cut short by her beeper again, summoning her to a patient's room. She rose quickly, offering Dr. Harris a grateful nod. His words left her feeling a flicker of courage inside, a reminder that she was not alone in her empathy. By the time Chloe made her way back to Tyler's room, her nerves felt frayed. She peered through the door window and saw him asleep, the steady rise and fall of his chest signaling that he was at least resting. She hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob. A lingering caution told her she might be getting too involved. The last thing she needed was another confrontation with Lisbeth or a stern lecture from hospital administrators. She stepped away, deciding to keep her distance for now. The guilt gnawed at her, but she didn't know how else to protect her job and her delicate financial situation. She recalled her mother's medical bills and her own overdue rent. Worry consumed her as she realized that while helping Tyler felt right, it might lead her to a personal breaking point. Chloe set her phone alarm to vibrate so it wouldn't disturb the quiet wing of the hospital during her next shift. She was scheduled for another round of long hours, and each passing day tightened the knot in her chest. The usual challenges of working at Central Hospital, heavy workloads, short staffing, complicated paperwork, seemed amplified since Tyler's arrival. During a lull between tending to a patient in post-operative care and checking medication records, she found herself passing Tyler's room again. A pang of anxiety gripped her. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see movement. Mustering some courage, she inched closer, stepping inside with caution. Tyler was awake this time, lying flat on the bed. His hair was still messy, though now it appeared someone had helped him wash it. He looked far more alert than on that rain-soaked night, but his eyes still held a restless quality. He turned his head at the sound of her footsteps. "Hi," Chloe greeted, trying to keep her tone neutral. "How are you feeling?" He cleared his throat, his voice still hoarse. "Better, thanks. The doctor said I should be okay in a couple of days." Chloe crossed her arms, partly to keep a professional distance and partly because she felt an odd mix of relief and concern. "That's good news. Do you, have a place to stay when you're discharged?" He paused, eyes drifting to the window. "I'm fine on my own," he replied, not entirely convincingly. "I don't want to be a burden." She studied him for a moment, noticing the pronounced angles of his cheeks, suggesting he hadn't eaten well in a long time. She recalled Lisbeth's warnings, the hospital's policies echoing in her mind, and felt torn between her duty to follow protocol and her instinct to help him. Eventually, she settled for a polite smile. "If you need help finding resources or shelter, we have a social worker who can point you in the right direction." Tyler turned back to her, giving a faint nod. "Thank you." The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with unasked questions. Chloe wanted to ask how he'd ended up on the streets, how a man with such a collected air found himself in tattered clothes in the middle of a storm, but she knew it wasn't her place, at least not yet. Just then, the door swung open and Nurse Supervisor Lisbeth Reynolds stepped in, clipboard in hand. She gave Tyler a perfunctory nod, then looked at Chloe. "I need to speak with you regarding some shift changes." Chloe followed Lisbeth into the hallway, where the supervisor abruptly stopped and turned. "We have an influx of patients in the ER," she stated. "I need you on rotation there for the next few days." "Sabrina will handle Tyler's case." A pang of disappointment flickered through Chloe, though she couldn't quite place why she felt so strongly about being removed from Tyler's direct care. She managed a nod. "Understood." Lisbeth's gaze flicked back to Tyler's doorway before returning to Chloe. "Just focus on your new assignment. Let's keep things running smoothly." With that, she walked off, leaving Chloe standing in the corridor. Over the next couple of days, Chloe barely caught a glimpse of Tyler. The emergency department demanded her full attention, back-to-back ambulance arrivals, family members in distress, and a barrage of medical crises that left her breathless by the end of each shift. She arrived home each night too tired to eat, collapsing onto her old couch where she sometimes fell asleep before mustering the energy to reach her bed. Whenever she did pass the section of the hospital where Tyler was being kept, she could only manage a quick glance inside his room. She noticed changes, a tray of untouched hospital food on the bedside table, or a different nurse adjusting his IV. She also noticed that his color seemed better, his posture less slumped. He was recovering, even if the puzzle of who he really was remained unanswered. One evening, just before her shift ended, she spotted Sabrina at the water fountain. Approaching her friend quietly, she cleared her throat. "Hey, how's everything in that wing? How's our mystery man?" Sabrina sipped water, then shrugged. "Tyler's stable, might be discharged soon. He still hasn't shared much about his background, but he's polite enough." Chloe forced a small laugh. "Polite in a place like this? That's rare." Sabrina nodded in agreement. "Listen, Chloe, I know you're swamped in the ER right now, but I also know you're worried about him. Maybe you could visit during your break tomorrow." Chloe hesitated, glancing around to ensure Lisbeth wasn't nearby. "I might, just to say hi." She tried to sound casual, but a nagging sense of responsibility and curiosity tugged at her. Even without direct orders, she felt compelled to see him, to ensure he was okay. What weighed on her mind more, though, was the feeling that she was rapidly losing control of her own life, her finances, her time, even her heart. Fear and hope intertwined as she realized she was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything, even though she was still unsure how. The next day, Chloe's schedule offered a brief respite, a 30-minute break between her ER duties and a mandatory training session. She felt a gnawing urge to head upstairs to Tyler's floor. She told herself it was simply a professional courtesy. He'd been her patient, if only briefly. Yet her heart raced as she took the elevator up, ignoring the whispers of colleagues who noticed her unusual detour. In the hallway, she recognized the gentle hum of daytime activity. Housekeeping carts rumbled along, and a distant chatter of nurses filled the background. Steeling her nerves, Chloe stepped into Tyler's room. To her surprise, he was standing by the window, wearing a thin hospital gown and a borrowed pair of slippers. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Oh, hello," he greeted quietly. The midday light revealed a clearer look at his features, short, sandy brown hair, and eyes that were indeed a striking shade of blue. His posture was more assured now, less frail. "Hi," Chloe replied, lifting a small paper bag she'd brought from the cafeteria. "I thought you might be hungry. I brought you a sandwich and some fruit." She approached tentatively, placing the bag on the bedside table. Tyler managed a subdued smile. "That's very kind. I'm not sure how to repay you." She waved off the remark. "Consider it a thank you for cooperating with the hospital staff. Everyone says you've been a model patient." His expression turned a little distant. "Well, I guess it's easier to cooperate when you're recovering. Anyway, I appreciate the help." He paused, eyes flicking to the view outside. "I heard they're discharging me soon," Chloe swallowed, feeling a tinge of unease. "Do you know where you'll go?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'll manage," he said, though the tension in his jaw suggested uncertainty. After a moment, he changed the subject, as if wishing to avoid more questions. "You really helped me that night. Thank you for that." She glanced at him. "You were in trouble," she responded softly. "Anyone else would have done the same." His quiet chuckle indicated he wasn't sure he believed that. "Not everyone," he said. He slowly sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for her to take the nearby chair. "Mind if I ask, why are you a nurse? You seem different from most people I've met in this place." Chloe hesitated, curious about his question. She leaned forward, hands clasped. "I guess I've always been drawn to caring for others. My mom raised me on a teacher's salary, and we didn't have much, but she taught me kindness could be free. When I got older, I decided to focus on a career that let me give something back. Nursing felt natural." Tyler nodded, reflecting on her words. He took a moment to open the bag and nibble on a piece of fruit. "That's admirable. Does it pay well?" His voice carried a subtle hint of irony. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Not really. I have a ton of student loan debt, but it's still worth it to me. I just..." She trailed off, feeling a little self-conscious. "I believe in what I do." He observed her with a contemplative gaze, as though he were studying not just her words but the conviction behind them. Before he could respond, the door swung open and Sabrina entered, checking Tyler's vitals chart. She raised an eyebrow upon seeing Chloe. "Hey, just making sure he's okay?" Sabrina asked casually. Chloe nodded. "I'm on a break. Figured I'd drop by." Sabrina smiled, though her expression hinted she knew Chloe's concern ran deeper than mere professionalism. She quietly updated Tyler's file and informed him that Dr. Norris would be by later to finalize discharge instructions. Once Sabrina left, a short silence lingered. Tyler twisted the hospital bracelet around his wrist, lost in thought. Finally, he glanced at Chloe again. "I'm sorry if I've been evasive. It's complicated." She nodded, understanding it was not her right to pry. "I get it. You don't have to explain. But if you need help, there are organizations that can give you a leg up. The social worker here can help connect you with them." Tyler stared at the floor. "I'll think about it," he said, a bit non-committal. Then his gaze lifted, and once more she felt the intensity in those eyes. "You might see me around again." She wasn't sure what he meant, but his words carried a hint of promise, or possibly a warning. The beep of her watch alarm reminded her that she needed to head to the training session. She stood, gathering her thoughts. "I have to go," she said softly, giving him a polite smile. "Take care, Tyler." He nodded. "Thank you again." for everything. Stepping into the hallway, Chloe released a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She still didn't fully understand why Tyler had shown up outside their hospital on that rainy night, nor how he managed to maintain an air of quiet dignity despite his situation. But a small flicker of possibility glimmered in her mind, an intuition that there was far more to him than met the eye. And she had a feeling her life was about to become more complicated than ever before. She hurried off to the training session, footsteps echoing against the polished tiles, wondering if she'd just taken her first uncertain steps into something that would transform her world. Morning light filtered through the slats of the hospital blinds, and Chloe Watson felt a slight ache in her lower back after another sleepless night. She had fallen asleep in the break room between overlapping shifts, her head resting on an uncomfortable couch cushion. When she finally peeled her eyes open, she was already running late to check in with the day nurse supervisor. Throwing on her rumpled sweater, she hurried down the corridor, passing cart-pushing orderlies and fellow nurses, greeting each other at the start of a new day. Her mind strayed to Tyler, who was likely being discharged any time now. A mix of concern and relief washed over her. After all, a discharged patient meant he was healthy enough to leave. But where would he go? As she was about to duck into an elevator, she nearly collided with Dr. Victor Harris. She stumbled back, embarrassed, but he caught her arm gently. His silver hair glinted under the hallway's fluorescent lights, and a kindly smile formed on his face. "Chloe, easy there," he said with a soft chuckle. "You look like you've been wrestling the night shift again." She sighed, offering a tired grin. "I pretty much have. I was just heading to see if Tyler's still here." Dr. Harris nodded. He adjusted the stethoscope around his neck and stepped aside so she could follow him down the corridor. "I saw him briefly this morning. He's waiting on final paperwork." Chloe felt her nerves flutter. So he's leaving for sure. They stopped by a large window overlooking the hospital's front driveway. Cars were pulling up, visitors stepping out to greet loved ones. The aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby kiosk drifted by, and Chloe realized she hadn't eaten since a quick snack the night before. "You've been worried about him," Dr. Harris observed. "It's normal to feel a sense of responsibility for a patient you've personally looked after, especially under such circumstances." Chloe glanced at the polished floor, hesitating. "He doesn't have anywhere to go. At least, that's the impression I get. And I know we have social workers, but it doesn't feel like enough." Dr. Harris crossed his arms thoughtfully. "I remember a time when your father and I worked together many years ago. He once told me that when it comes to helping people, there's no such thing as going too far, as long as it's safe and ethical. But," he cautioned gently, "you do need to be mindful of your own limitations. The hospital's bureaucracy can be tough." She inhaled, reminded of her precarious financial situation and how easily she could end up on the wrong side of an administrative complaint. "I don't want to break the rules, but at the same time, I can't stand by and pretend he's not important just because he doesn't have insurance." Dr. Harris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "If I can offer any guidance, let it be this. Never lose that kindness. There are ways to help without jeopardizing yourself completely. Just proceed carefully. And if you need an ally in all this, you know where to find me." Chloe met his gaze. In his eyes, she sensed genuine support, almost paternal. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. She'd been searching for some sign that she wasn't making a fool of herself. He nodded once. "I'll be around if you need me." A few minutes later, she finally made it to Tyler's room. The bed was neatly made, the IV stand empty. There he stood, wearing the same scuffed sneakers he'd arrived in, along with a fresh t-shirt and jeans that Sabrina had found in the charity donation box. While still somewhat worn, the clothes were an improvement over the shredded hoodie from that stormy night. He was tucking a piece of paper, probably discharge instructions, into his pocket. Upon seeing her, Tyler offered a tentative smile. "Hello, Nurse Watson." "Chloe," she corrected gently, stepping closer. "So it's official? You're free to go?" He shrugged. "That's what they tell me. I appreciate everything you and the staff have done." She scanned his face, searching for any sign of fear or uncertainty. "Have you spoken to Denise, our social worker? She might help you find somewhere to stay." Tyler nodded slowly. "I did. She gave me some information about local shelters and outreach programs. I'll figure something out." Chloe wasn't convinced. Something in his subdued tone suggested he might just disappear. She pulled a small slip of paper from her scrub's pocket and handed it to him. "Look, if you need help, real help, here's my number. I know it's unorthodox to give out personal information like this, but if you ever find yourself in trouble..." His eyes flicked down to the paper, then back to her. For a moment, she thought she saw gratitude tinged with something else, something deeper she couldn't quite name. "Thanks," he said quietly. Sabrina stepped in, clipboard in hand, to complete the discharge. With a polite nod, she explained the final medical instructions. Tyler listened, though Chloe could tell his mind was elsewhere. When the process ended, he slid his arms into a threadbare coat provided by the hospital's lost and found, then turned to Chloe. "I don't know what to say besides thank you. You saved me in more ways than one." Before she could formulate a response, he stepped into the hallway. Chloe followed, but he was quick, almost eager to avoid lingering. She watched from a distance as he walked through the exit door. There was no fanfare, no well-wishers or waiting relatives, just a man heading out into the bright morning sun, alone. Chloe's heart twisted. She wanted to chase after him, to make sure he had a real plan, but the demands of her job beckoned, and Dr. Harris's advice echoed in her mind. There were ways to help without risking everything. She would have to trust Tyler to reach out if he truly needed her. Yet as she returned to her daily tasks, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were meant to cross again. A quiet sense of anticipation lingered, a spark of possibility Dr. Harris had encouraged her to follow, and deep inside she knew that if that moment came, she would need more than just her medical training to face what lay ahead. Chloe's sneakers squeaked against the hospital's polished floor as she tried to juggle 2 patient charts and her phone. It was late afternoon on the next day, and the memory of Tyler's discharge still lingered in her thoughts. Every so often, she found herself scanning the hallways as if expecting him to be there. She managed to slip away to the break room for a brief moment of quiet. Slouching onto the worn vinyl sofa, she closed her eyes, hoping a quick rest would settle the unease in her chest. Her phone buzzed, startling her out of the half-dream state. Glancing at the screen, she saw a message from her landlord. "Rent is overdue. Please let me know when to expect payment." Wincing, she locked the phone and let it fall beside her. The harsh reality of her finances weighed heavily on her. Even if she wanted to help Tyler beyond giving him a phone number, she was in no position to offer more. She could barely support herself. A quiet cough from the doorway drew her attention. "Doctor." Harris stood there, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Got a minute, Chloe?" he asked gently. She sat up and smoothed her scrubs. "Of course." He gestured for her to follow him into the corridor, where staff rarely ventured. It was near the back entrance, close to the supply room, quiet enough for a private conversation. She noticed a kind but determined set to his features. "I have something for you," he said quietly, pulling a sealed envelope from his coat pocket. "Before you say anything, understand this is not charity. It's an advance on a research project I'm heading, and I'd like you to be my assistant if you're interested." Chloe blinked, staring at the envelope. "Dr. Harris, I can't accept money from you. He raised a hand, halting her protest. Hear me out. This project involves patient empathy training and nurse-patient communication techniques. You'd be a perfect fit to help me gather data and develop training modules for the younger staff. There's a modest stipend involved. Let's call it an opportunity to broaden your career. She hesitated, feeling her heart quicken. On one hand, it would help with her overdue bills, maybe even give her a chance to breathe. On the other hand, she didn't want to mix personal favor with professional duties. Still, Dr. Harris was a respected mentor. She trusted his intentions. "All right," she said softly, taking the envelope. I don't know how to thank you." He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "Thank me by doing a good job. You've got a gift for understanding people, Chloe. It's about time the hospital recognized that." His words warmed her chest. For a moment, she thought about Tyler and how she'd been powerless to help him beyond basic nursing. Maybe with a bit more financial stability, she could do more for patients in dire need without worrying as much about the hospital's bureaucracy or her own precarious living situation. The following day, Chloe formally agreed to assist Dr. Harris in the research. The arrangement meant she'd occasionally step away from her regular duties to conduct interviews with patients, observe staff interactions, and compile notes. Though still a part of her daily nursing schedule, this was a step, perhaps the first real step, out of her stagnant routine. During this time, her shift manager, Lisbeth Reynolds, raised an eyebrow at the news, but didn't stand in Chloe's way. "Just make sure this doesn't affect your floor responsibilities," she said, in her usual no-nonsense tone. Chloe nodded, determined to balance both roles. One afternoon, while reviewing training materials in a vacant conference room, she thought back to Tyler again. How quickly he'd vanished from the hospital doors, offering nothing but a soft goodbye. Had he found shelter? A job? Was he still out there on the streets? She forced herself to focus, flipping through a binder of proposed empathy-based care protocols. Each page reminded her that these hospital guidelines often conflicted with the messy realities of patients' lives. Maybe that was why her memory of Tyler stuck with her. He represented that messy reality. He had defied the usual categories. He was polite, educated in certain ways, but lacked the basic resources to survive comfortably. Chloe found her thoughts drifting to a secret hope that he might call the number she'd given him. It was an unrealistic wish, given how often she herself changed phone numbers in the past when money was tight. Still, the notion lingered. Leaving the conference room, she felt the tension between her desire to help people on a deeper level and the constraints of the hospital system. Accepting Dr. Harris's project was a kind of clean break from her old pattern of helpless frustration. Now, she had a chance to shape policies and training that might make it easier for patients like Tyler to receive care without so much resistance. The shift change buzzer sounded, pulling her back to the present. With a twinge of renewed purpose, Chloe headed for the elevator. Even if she couldn't find Tyler, or if he never reached out, she could use this moment, this break from the norm, to grow stronger and more capable of helping the people who fell through the cracks, and maybe that path would eventually lead her to cross Tyler's again. Weeks passed, and late summer sunshine poured through the windows of Chicago's Central Hospital, casting elongated shadows on the polished floors. The place still buzzed with the usual tide of patients and staff, but Chloe felt as if she had entered a new realm within these familiar walls. She was juggling her regular nursing responsibilities while assisting Dr. Harris with empathy training sessions. And though exhausting, it was also strangely invigorating. She observed new nurse trainees as they shadowed more experienced staff. Chloe was meant to record how well the trainees communicated with patients, whether they practiced active listening, and how they navigated hospital protocols. Occasionally, Dr. Harris invited her to share personal anecdotes, moments she'd had where strict rules clashed with genuine compassion. During a debrief session in a small conference room, a group of wide-eyed, freshly hired nurses sat around a long table, leaning forward in interest. Dr. Harris nodded for Chloe to speak. Clearing her throat, she thought about Tyler's case, though she knew better than to share specific details. That experience had taught her more than she could ever quantify. One of the key principles in empathic care, she began, is recognizing that every patient is a human being with fears and dignity, not just a medical chart. In an emergency, we tend to see only the illness, but the patient's story matters too. Sometimes, that story can impact their entire treatment plan. A hush fell over the room as the younger nurses absorbed her words. In that moment, Chloe saw how her own hesitation to break certain rules had shaped not just Tyler's fate, but her own perspective. She offered a small, encouraging smile to the group before Dr. Harris segued into a role-playing exercise. That afternoon, after the session wrapped up, she walked across the hospital courtyard to catch a breath of fresh air. The heat clung to the asphalt, making her squint. She found a shady bench and took a seat, scanning passers-by. A wave of nostalgia hit her as she recalled Tyler leaving the hospital with that uncertain expression. She wondered if he was somewhere safe, or if life had gotten even harder for him. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ring of her phone. Fishing it from her pocket, she answered automatically, "Chloe Watson speaking." "Chloe, hi." The voice on the other end was raspy and low. For a split second, she didn't recognize it. "It's Tyler." Her heart flipped. "Tyler? Are you all right?" He paused. "I'm okay, more or less. I'm sorry for calling out of the blue." She stood from the bench, stepping farther from the crowds. "No, it's fine. I'm just surprised." "Where are you?" There was an audible hesitation before he answered. "I'm downtown, near the old train station on Jefferson. I remembered the number you gave me, and I hope it was okay to call. I could use some help." Her mind raced. "Are you in trouble? Do you need a doctor?" "No, not that kind of trouble," he replied, exhaling heavily. "It's complicated. I'll explain when we meet, if you can spare a few minutes." Chloe glanced at her watch. She had a small window before her next shift. Her conscience wrestled with her sense of duty, but Dr. Harris's recent advice rang in her ears. Sometimes you help by stepping outside your comfort zone. "I can head over in about half an hour," she said, heart pounding. "Wait for me in front of the station." She hung up, a swirl of emotions invading her. Part of her was relieved he was still around. Another part worried about what she was getting herself into. She quickly informed Dr. Harris she needed to step away for an urgent personal matter. He waved her off with understanding. Hopping on a city bus, Chloe found a seat and tried to calm her nerves. The journey took her through crowded streets and towering buildings. She found herself reflecting on how a single, compassionate act, helping Tyler that stormy night, had led to this moment. Before long, she spotted the familiar sign for Jefferson Station and pulled the cord, stepping off at the next stop. Standing in front of the station's worn, faded bricks, she scanned the small clusters of people. Then she saw him, Tyler, seated on a low wall, wearing a plain shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He appeared healthier than before, but there was a tension in his shoulders. When he noticed her, he gave a quick nod. "Hey," he said, voice subdued. "Hi." She walked closer. "What's going on? How can I help?" He stood, looking away as if searching for the right words. "I promise, I'll explain. There's a coffee shop just around the corner. Could we talk there?" Chloe nodded slowly, a tightness in her chest. She had no idea what she was about to learn, but she had already crossed the threshold of normalcy by coming here. With a mix of trepidation and determination, she followed him down the sidewalk, each step feeling like a small leap into an unknown world beyond her structured hospital life. Something told her that nothing would be the same after this conversation. The coffee shop Tyler led Chloe to was tucked beneath an old brick apartment building, its red awning faded and canvas frayed. A neon sign in the window flickered, making the word coffee appear as if it were winking at passers-by. Inside, mismatched furniture and the aroma of roasted beans created a cozy but unpretentious atmosphere. A handful of patrons sat scattered at wooden tables, some hunched over laptops, others chatting quietly. They settled at a small corner table, the light from a single bulb above them casting soft shadows. Chloe studied Tyler's face under this subdued glow. He looked different from the uncertain patient she'd seen in the hospital, yet the same aura of quiet intensity lingered. She noticed that his hair was trimmed neatly and his cheeks had more color, as if he'd been taking better care of himself. When the server approached, Chloe ordered a simple cup of green tea and Tyler asked for a black coffee. Once the server left, Chloe clasped her hands together. "So, tell me what's going on. Are you in some sort of legal trouble, or—" He shook his head, exhaling slowly. "No, nothing like that. It's more, I guess you could call it a personal crisis." He seemed to wrestle with his words. "Back when we first met, I never told you the truth about why I ended up on the streets." Chloe felt her shoulders tense. She remembered how he'd been so cagey about his background. "I figured you had your reasons. But if you're ready to talk, I'm here to listen." He studied her for a long moment, as though measuring her sincerity. "After a close friend of mine passed away, I spiraled a bit. This friend was someone I respected a lot. He was the person who kept me grounded in my professional life, especially when he died. I started questioning my own life choices, the direction I was taking, and whether anything I did mattered." Chloe noticed a tremor in Tyler's voice. It was as if a deep well of grief lay just below the surface. She waited, not wanting to interrupt. "I decided to, remove myself from everything I knew. I wanted to see if the world would treat me differently if I looked like I had nothing." He paused, searching her eyes. "And it did. I was ignored, dismissed. The only person who bothered to help me that night in the storm was you." Her heart thumped. She recalled the hospital scene vividly, rain, cold, his trembling body leaning against the wall. "I was just doing what I thought was right," she said softly. He gave a faint smile. "You did more than that. You risked your job, your reputation, to make sure I didn't die of hypothermia outside the hospital doors. That meant something to me." The server returned briefly, placing their drinks on the table. Tyler curled his hands around his cup, but didn't drink. He seemed lost in thought again, then sighed. "Here's the part you might find odd," he said slowly, picking at the coffee cup's handle. "I'm not exactly who I let you believe I was. When I said I had nowhere to go, it wasn't about lacking resources. It was about choosing to be cut off. The truth is, I have money. Enough that I don't have to worry about daily survival if I choose not to." Chloe blinked, trying to process this sudden admission. "Money? But how?" "You said you were alone. I am alone emotionally," he clarified, voice tight. "But financially, let's say I have enough security that sleeping on the streets was never my only option. I did it because I was searching for something, perspective, or a reason not to be cynical about the world." A part of Chloe felt relief that he hadn't truly been destitute. Yet another part felt confused, almost betrayed. "Why didn't you say anything before?" He met her gaze with a mixture of remorse and vulnerability. "Would you have treated me the same way if you'd known I could afford to rent a luxury suite that night?" She hesitated. uncertain. She couldn't deny that money often changed the way people interacted. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe not, but I like to think I would have helped you anyway." He allowed a small smile. "I believe you would. That's why I called you. Because I need your advice. I'm still not sure I've found what I was looking for out there, but I do know I want to do something meaningful with my resources now, something that helps people who genuinely need it." Chloe took a long sip of her tea, her thoughts racing. "You're telling me you left the hospital, went back to, well, whatever your life is, and now you want to give back?" She tried to make sense of it all, remembering the rule-laden hospital environment and how it so rarely aligned with genuine acts of charity. Tyler nodded, a steely resolve in his eyes. "I had a realization after leaving the hospital. If someone like you, struggling with your own debts and constraints, could still be that compassionate, then I, with all my unused resources, have no excuse not to act." She opened her mouth to speak, but Tyler lifted a hand gently. "I know this is a lot to drop on you. I'm not asking for an answer right now, but I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about possibilities. Maybe help me figure out a way to make a real difference in people's lives." Chloe felt her heart pound as she looked at him. No one had ever asked her to weigh in on something so monumental. Her days were consumed by routine hospital tasks, scolding supervisors, and monthly bills she could barely pay. The idea of shaping a new project with Tyler sparked a sense of excitement, tempered by skepticism. "Tyler," she began carefully, "I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. You want me, someone who can't even pay her rent on time, to help you invest in a charitable plan?" A slow, earnest nod. "Yes, because you've seen the system's flaws up close, and you care enough to do something about it." For a moment, she could only stare at him, visions of the battered hospital corridors flickering in her mind. Perhaps, she thought, this was the moment Dr. Harris had subtly warned her about, an opportunity to step beyond the confines of her ordinary world and into something extraordinary, if she had the courage to accept. They lingered in the coffee shop for another hour, drinks long finished. Outside the windows, traffic bustled past, and the hum of the city underscored every exchange of words. Tyler's posture remained relaxed, but there was an undercurrent of tension in his expression, as though he feared Chloe might reject his plan outright. "How exactly do you see this working?" she asked at last. "Charitable foundations, non-profit clinics, grants, those things are big, complicated, and I'm not some high-level administrator." Tyler pressed his lips together thoughtfully. "I know setting up something official will be complex. I have the means, but I lack the practical understanding of how hospital systems work on a day-to-day basis. You do. You also understand what patients need when they fall through the cracks." Chloe looked down at her empty mug, recalling the countless times she felt helpless against bureaucratic rules or insurance denials. "I do have ideas about how things could improve, especially in underserved areas. But," she paused, uncertain how to phrase the biggest sticking point. "Why me, specifically? You could find an entire team of experts." He leaned forward, earnest. "You're right, I could hire consultants or administrators, but they don't have your heart. They haven't been on the ground, working double shifts, seeing patients at their most vulnerable, and they certainly haven't saved me from a gutter in the middle of a storm. I want you because you're real." His words resonated deeply, and she felt a surge of a strange mix of flattery and fear. The notion that this man was effectively a stranger a few weeks ago, someone she'd assumed was penniless, still boggled her mind. But she found herself warming to the concept of actually changing lives on a broader scale. "All right," she said, voice shaky but determined. I'm not making any promises, but I'll at least hear more. A small smile graced Tyler's lips. That's all I ask. They emerged into the busy street, the sunlight making Chloe squint. She fidgeted with the strap of her purse, feeling a nervous flutter in her stomach. Tyler offered to walk her back to the bus stop, and she agreed, wanting a bit more time to gather her thoughts. So, what's your next move? She ventured, weaving around pedestrians on the sidewalk. Tyler ran a hand through his hair. Well, I've scheduled some meetings with potential investors. The idea is to create a foundation aimed at healthcare access for low-income communities. But I also want to hear your perspective. Where do you think the help is most urgently needed? Chloe gave a short laugh, though it carried no real mirth. Where do I even begin? Affordable prescriptions, free clinics, better nurse-to-patient ratios, mental health support. She trailed off, suddenly aware of just how large the problem was. It's overwhelming. He nodded, casting a concerned glance her way. That's why I need someone who understands the reality at ground level, someone to prioritize. We can't fix everything at once, but we can take small, targeted steps. When they reached the bus stop, a sense of urgency overcame Chloe. Her next hospital shift was starting soon. I'll think about it, she promised, but I need to be transparent. I'm already juggling a research project with Dr. Harris, plus my normal shifts, and I live paycheck to paycheck. I can't just drop everything for something that might not even pan out. Tyler's eyes softened. I get it. I wouldn't expect you to risk your livelihood without a clear plan. Let's keep the conversation open. I'll put together some preliminary outlines of what I want to do, and you can tell me if I'm way off the mark. She blinked, almost relieved by how practical that sounded. All right, that makes sense. Hesitating a moment, she said, if you're sure you're not just throwing money at a random cause. No, he interrupted gently. I'm sure. I've been searching for a purpose, and this is the first time I've felt genuinely driven. I see a path forward, and you helped light the way. Her cheeks warmed at the sincerity in his tone. The bus rumbled to a stop beside them, exhaust fumes filling the humid air. Chloe turned, heart pounding with a strange mixture of excitement and worry. Let's talk soon, she said, stepping onto the bus steps. Text me or call when you have something ready. He nodded, stepping back onto the sidewalk. I will. Take care, Chloe. The doors folded shut and the bus lurched forward. Through the smudged window, she watched Tyler fade into the crowd, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. She gripped the metal pole, mind swirling with the implications of what had just happened. Something about Tyler's plan felt bigger than anything she'd ever been a part of. Bigger, even, than the day-to-day fight for patients in her ward. As the bus wove through traffic, Chloe stared at the city skyline. This conversation had shifted something inside her. There was no denying that she was stepping away from the familiar order of her life and into an uncharted territory that held both promise and risk. And for better or worse, she sensed there was no going back. Returning to Central Hospital later that day, Chloe felt tension in the pit of her stomach. She'd been gone longer than planned. Lisbeth Reynolds, the nurse supervisor, was known for her sharp gaze when staff weren't at their stations exactly on time. Chloe braced herself as she swiped her badge at the security checkpoint and walked briskly toward the staff lounge to drop off her bag. Sure enough, Lisbeth was waiting in the hallway with a pointed expression. Her arms were folded and her foot tapped lightly on the linoleum floor. "You're 15 minutes late, Watson," she said, voice carrying a note of disapproval. Chloe winced. "I'm really sorry. I had a personal emergency downtown." Lisbeth's brows arched skeptically. "Next time, give us a call. Understaffing in the cardiac wing is not something we can take lightly. I had to pull Sabrina into cover for you." "I understand," Chloe said, keeping her tone even. "It won't happen again." Lisbeth eyed her for a moment longer, then relented with a curt nod. "Get changed and report to the telemetry station. Your first patient is waiting." A rush of relief coursed through Chloe as she hurried to change into her fresh scrubs. She felt guilty about leaving her co-workers in a bind, but part of her also knew she couldn't turn her back on the conversation she'd just had with Tyler. This was the precarious balancing act of her life, trying to do her job while a voice inside nudged her to reach for something more. Soon, she was checking the vitals of an elderly patient in the cardiac unit. The woman, Mrs. Henderson, had kind eyes but labored breathing. As Chloe adjusted the woman's bed, Mrs. Henderson let out a low cough. "You're that nurse who's always smiling," she said weakly, a faint grin appearing at the corner of her mouth. Chloe returned the smile. "Am I? Well, I guess that's a nice reputation to have." Mrs. Henderson settled against the pillows. "Sometimes I need to see someone smiling to remind me not everything in life is bleak." She closed her eyes for a moment, her oxygen monitor beeping steadily. Chloe adjusted an IV drip, touched by the woman's words. Even in the midst of her own internal storm, she was reminded of how the smallest gestures of kindness still held power. She'd learned that firsthand with Tyler, and now she felt that same gentle nudge to keep going. Hours rolled by in a blur of changing IV lines, consulting with doctors, and ensuring patients' charts were up to date. Dr. Harris passed by to give her a thumbs up for the empathy research project. Chloe offered a tired but genuine nod, grateful for his continued support. She wanted to tell him about her meeting with Tyler, but the hallway bustled with activity, and she decided to wait for a more private moment. Eventually, during a coffee break in the late evening, Sabrina joined Chloe in the staff lounge. Sabrina carried a notebook and a half-eaten granola bar, her curly hair pinned up in a messy bun. She slumped into the chair beside Chloe with a dramatic sigh. "I swear, the older I get, the heavier these shifts feel," Sabrina joked, rubbing her eyes. Then she eyed Chloe curiously. "So, what was this personal emergency all about, if you don't mind sharing?" Chloe swallowed, considering how much to reveal. "I met up with Tyler, the patient from a few weeks ago." Sabrina's eyebrows shot up. "The guy we discharged, the one you were worried about." "Yep," Chloe confirmed. "He called me, asked if we could talk." "Turns out there's more to his story than I thought." She briefly outlined Tyler's revelation, his resources, his guilt, his wish to make a difference. "He wants me to help him figure out a plan to support those who can't afford care." Sabrina listened intently, her expression transforming from surprise to intrigue. "Wow, that's big. I mean, you're basically telling me this guy is loaded, but he was living on the street by choice." Chloe nodded. "He's been through something traumatic, lost someone close to him. Now he wants to invest in real healthcare change, and for some reason, he wants my input." Sabrina let out a low whistle. "That's either the luckiest coincidence in the world or I don't even know what else to call it. Do you trust him?" Chloe mulled it over. "I do, oddly enough. He doesn't seem shady. More like he's wrestling with a moral crisis. We didn't go into too many specifics, but he's serious. And he seems genuine." Sabrina leaned forward, excitement in her voice. "Well, you've always wanted to do more than what this hospital allows. Maybe this is your chance. Are you going to say yes?" Chloe rubbed her temples. "I'm not sure yet. I can't just quit my job. I need steady income to survive, but I can at least offer some insight." Her friend nodded, a supportive smile forming. "Whatever you decide, let me know if you need backup. You know I'm behind you, even if it's just moral support." Chloe's heart swelled with gratitude. She was fortunate to have Sabrina and Dr. Harris in her corner. For the first time in ages, she felt a sense of direction, an undercurrent of momentum that suggested her life was on the cusp of major transformation. The very thought made her both exhilarated and fearful, a feeling that lingered as she finished her break and stepped back onto the hospital floor. Outside, the Chicago night settled in, city lights twinkling against the darkness. Somewhere in that vast urban sprawl, Tyler was likely planning his next steps, and Chloe realized she was quietly, but unmistakably, planning hers as well. Chloe Watson stepped out of the hospital at dawn, blinking against the early morning light. Night shifts always left her with a foggy sense of time, but this particular stretch felt heavier. Her thoughts circled back to the conversation she'd had with Tyler about creating a foundation to help the underserved. In the past, such grand ideas had belonged to someone else's world, people with resources, stability, and confidence. Yet here she was, somehow in the middle of it. She began her short walk to the nearby coffee shop, hoping to decompress. The crisp morning air carried the promise of fall, and a light breeze ruffled her brown hair, which she'd tied back in a low ponytail. Inside, the cafe's warmth and scent of fresh pastries enveloped her. She ordered a simple black coffee, then settled in a corner seat to gather her thoughts before heading home to grab some sleep. Her phone pinged with a new message. Leaning forward, she checked the screen. It was from Tyler. "Morning, Chloe. Hope you're well. I'm meeting with a legal advisor next week to discuss the structure of the non-profit. Would love your input if you can spare some time. No pressure." To Chloe's heart thumped a little faster. She appreciated how he ended with "no pressure," but she also knew an opportunity like this was a rarity. Biting her lip, she began typing, "Hey Tyler, I'm definitely interested. Just finished a night shift, so I'm going to crash for a bit. Let me know which day, and I'll do my best to be there." She hesitated briefly before hitting send, her mind flickering with all the obstacles she faced: work schedules, debt, fear of stepping outside her comfort zone. Still, Dr. Harris's words echoed in her mind. There are ways to help without risking everything. Committing to that mindset, she tucked away her phone and savored the last sips of coffee. Later that evening, once she'd had some rest, Chloe headed back to the hospital for a different shift. She'd barely stepped onto the floor when Sabrina hurried over, brandishing a patient chart like a flag. "Chloe, you won't believe this," Sabrina murmured, steering her into a quiet corner. "Marcus Doherty, the hospital's finance director, has been snooping around the wards, asking questions about your involvement with Dr. Harris's empathy training. He's worried about budget overages." Chloe frowned, recalling Marcus's tight-lipped demeanor. "Budget overages? We're hardly spending anything beyond normal operational costs." Sabrina's eyes narrowed. "I know, but rumor has it he's also checking if any staff is using hospital time for personal agendas. You might want to keep your head down." Chloe's stomach twisted. It felt unfair. She was balancing everything by the book. Yet she remembered how she once crossed paths with Marcus when Tyler was admitted. Maybe he was keeping tabs on her ever since. "I'll be careful," she said, trying to sound calm. "Thanks for letting me know." As she proceeded with her shift, Chloe noticed tension in the air. A wave of new patients arrived, many of them uninsured or underinsured. She spent hours juggling phone calls and finding ways to code treatments so these people wouldn't be completely shut out. By the time she closed her final chart for the night, she was emotionally drained. The system felt like an endless loop. Patients needed help, the hospital needed money, and Chloe was stuck in the middle. In the midst of her exhaustion, she thought of Tyler's plan. If there was a way to create a supportive network, maybe a specialized clinic or a mobile health unit, many of these patients wouldn't have to endure such bureaucracy and indignity. That small glimmer of a solution fueled her sense that she was on the right path, even if it was fraught with challenges. Later, she glimpsed Dr. Harris outside the ICU. He waved her over, eyebrows pinched in concern. "I heard Marcus was sniffing around again," he said quietly. "Listen, Chloe, don't let him intimidate you. He's known for trying to cut corners wherever possible, even at the expense of patient care." She sighed. "I wish I could ignore him, but I can't afford to lose this job." "You won't," Dr. Harris assured her, his voice brimming with quiet resolve. "Just do your work diligently. As for the empathy training, we're well within the approved scope. I'll handle any questions from administration." Chloe nodded, some tension releasing from her chest. "Thank you. I appreciate the backup." Before heading home, she made time to pull Sabrina aside and fill her in on the Tyler development. "He wants my insight on how to set up the non-profit," Chloe explained, voice low so passing staff wouldn't overhear. Sabrina's eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and caution. "That's amazing, but also, wow, this is going to be a lot on your plate." "I know," Chloe agreed. "But if we succeed, imagine how many people we could help. It's like a dream I never thought I'd get to chase." Encouraged by her friend's enthusiasm, Chloe left the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, there were real tests ahead, financial pressures, a watchful administration, her own fears of failing, but she found that even the smallest step toward a compassionate solution felt worth it. It was as though she'd finally tapped into a well of motivation that no late-night shift or bureaucratic scolding could extinguish. 3 days later, Chloe arrived at a modest law firm in downtown Chicago. The office suite was on the 6th floor of a nondescript building, its hallway lined with framed certificates and dull beige walls. She'd come straight from a morning shift, wearing a casual blouse and jeans, her hair still damp from a quick shower at home. Tyler was waiting for her in the small reception area, dressed in a crisp, dark button-down shirt. The outfit reminded her that he had once been living on the streets, yet now looked every bit the successful entrepreneur. He stood as soon as she walked in. "Thanks for coming," he said, offering a smile that betrayed a mix of nerves and excitement. "Thanks for inviting me," she replied quietly, still trying to picture herself participating in a legal consultation. "So what's the plan?" He ushered her toward a conference room where a middle-aged attorney, Rebecca Clark, introduced herself with a polite handshake. The woman had sharp eyes and a warm demeanor, immediately putting Chloe slightly at ease. They sat around a compact wooden table, a stack of papers laid out in front of Rebecca. She explained the basics of forming a charitable foundation, articles of incorporation, IRS filings, board structures, and potential partnerships. Chloe found herself taking notes, nodding along, though her mind buzzed with 1,000 questions. Tyler occasionally glanced at Chloe, as if to gauge her reactions. The legal jargon felt daunting: directors, bylaws, compliance, but his presence was steady, and Chloe sensed he was leaning on her judgment, not just the lawyer's expertise. Half an hour into the meeting, Rebecca paused, looking at them both over the rim of her reading glasses. "It's clear you're motivated to do good," she said, "but these are big steps. The foundation will need a core mission. You have ideas about clinics, outreach, or scholarships, maybe all of the above. But you'll need focus at the start, and you'll need someone to run point on day-to-day operations." Chloe's pen stilled on her notepad. She cast a questioning look at Tyler, and he cleared his throat. "I'm considering asking Chloe to help shape the early stages, especially with medical outreach. Obviously, I'll be providing the funding, but she knows the realities of patient care." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea. A nurse's perspective is invaluable. Still, let me remind you, this is a significant responsibility. Ms. Watson, you'd be venturing into administrative and strategic work, not just patient care." Chloe's heart pounded. She imagined stepping away from her routines at the hospital. Could she truly handle that? "I'd still have to keep my job for now," she said carefully. "I can't just resign. I have bills, student loans." Tyler leaned forward, his tone gentle but resolute. "That's entirely understandable. We can start small, part-time consultation. We'll see where it leads." A swirl of relief and apprehension coursed through Chloe. She realized she actually wanted this. Yet she also knew her finances were precarious. Even a slight risk could upend everything. Was it foolish to hold out hope that, with Tyler's resources and her insider knowledge, they could create something that truly made a difference? As the meeting wrapped up, Rebecca promised to draft the necessary documents. "You'll need a name for this foundation," she reminded them. "That sometimes helps define the vision." They exchanged glances, but agreed to discuss it another time. Once they stepped back into the hallway, Tyler exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath. "Well, that was something." Chloe nodded, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" He offered a weary grin. "I am. I feel like I woke up from a long sleep after losing my friend. Wandering the streets gave me perspective, but I've realized empathy alone isn't enough. It has to translate into concrete action." She was struck by the conviction in his words. "I get it," she murmured. "At the hospital, I see so many things I'd love to fix, but I always feel powerless." "We're not powerless," he countered. "Not if we work together." They rode the elevator down in thoughtful silence. In the lobby, Tyler walked Chloe to the revolving doors. She felt a flutter in her chest, an inexplicable mixture of gratitude and dread. This was her dream in so many ways, practical healthcare support for the vulnerable. But was she ready for the scrutiny, the pressure, and possibly the judgment of co-workers like Lisbeth or finance-minded administrators like Marcus? Tyler must have sensed her hesitation. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said softly. "No giant leaps until you're comfortable." She mustered a smile, feeling a surge of genuine warmth. "That means a lot, Tyler. Thank you." As she stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, a light breeze rustled her hair. She realized she was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in a while. Yes, doubt lingered in the corners of her mind, but for now, the sense of purpose eclipsed the fear. She clutched her notepad with renewed determination, heading toward the bus stop and thinking about how to juggle her hospital shifts with this new undertaking. Yet as she looked ahead, she also knew that the challenges were far from over. The hardest tests were still to come, lurking just beyond her next workday. A week later, Chloe found herself back in Dr. Harris's corner office, eyes scanning a budget spreadsheet for the empathy training program. Marcus Dougherty had requested a meeting, claiming he wanted to ensure all spending fell within the hospital's strict guidelines. Dr. Harris stood beside Chloe, arms folded, while Marcus leaned over the desk with an expression that radiated skepticism. "So these are the revised numbers?" Marcus asked, tapping the screen. "I still see some discrepancies in how you've coded staff hours," Chloe swallowed, recalling the conversation with Sabrina about Marcus's sudden interest in their activities. "We coded them under professional development, since the staff are learning skills directly beneficial to patient care." Marcus arched a brow. "Yes, but additional staff hours were pulled for pilot programs in different wards. That's not standard." He paused, giving Chloe a flat stare. "Nurse Watson, I understand you're heavily involved. Just curious, are any of your personal endeavors intersecting with hospital time or resources?" Chloe blinked, her pulse quickening. Personal endeavors. He had no direct evidence of her meetings with Tyler, but the insinuation was clear. She resisted the urge to snap back. I assure you, any extra hours I've worked on new training have been logged properly or done off shift. Doctor. Harris cleared his throat, a subtle show of support. Yes, and everything has been within the professional development framework already approved by the board. Marcus regarded them both for a moment, then stepped back, crossing his arms. The board's approval can be revoked if we find mismanagement. I'll be conducting a thorough review. When he left, Dr. Harris set down his reading glasses with a weary sigh. I knew he'd try something like this. He's always been tight with the budget, but it's getting ridiculous. Chloe exhaled slowly, feeling her shoulders slump. He basically accused me of using hospital resources for my own, whatever he thinks I'm doing. Dr. Harris offered a reassuring pat on her arm. Don't let him intimidate you. The best way to handle this is to stay transparent. Keep meticulous records of your hours, just in case. If you ever need me to vouch for you, I will. Nodding, she mustered a small thanks before returning to her shift, though a gnawing unease followed her. She moved through patient check-ins mechanically, trying to keep a professional face while her mind churned with scenarios of how Marcus might try to corner her again. Late in the afternoon, she found an empty corner of the lounge and dialed Tyler's number. He answered on the second ring, his tone almost relieved. Chloe, hey, everything all right? She spoke in hushed tones. I'm just giving you a heads up. The hospital's finance guy has been digging around, apparently suspecting me of, well, I'm not entirely sure what, but I'm worried he might use any sign of outside activity against me. A moment of silence passed. I'm sorry, Tyler said sincerely. I never meant for you to face trouble at work. If you want to slow things down, I understand. Chloe let out a tense breath. Honestly, I might, but not permanently. I still want to be involved in the foundation. It's just, my job is my lifeline right now. Tyler's response came softly. I get it. Don't risk your livelihood on my account. Let's proceed carefully. We can keep our collaboration private for now until we have something concrete to show. Then we present it formally, maybe even with the hospital's blessing, if we play our cards right. Her mood lifted a bit. That sounds safer, yes. Thanks. She hung up, feeling a twinge of hope. If she and Tyler could finalize some structure or pilot project, perhaps the hospital administration would see it as beneficial rather than suspicious. Still, the notion of Marcus breathing down her neck haunted her as she finished her shift. By the time she got home, her nerves were frayed. That night, she curled up on her worn-out couch, the living room lamp providing a dim glow over the stacked medical textbooks on her coffee table. She had planned to go through some notes for the empathy research, but her eyes kept drifting to the envelope containing her overdue bills. A headache throbbed at her temples. A wave of frustration and helplessness surged through her. She wanted so badly to help Tyler build something meaningful, to escape the hospital's rigid environment that didn't always align with genuine compassion, yet she was shackled by financial realities. If she lost her job, rent wouldn't be the only problem. Health insurance, her mother's medication costs, everything rested on that paycheck. In desperation, she grabbed her phone and typed a quick message to Sabrina. Is it crazy that I want to keep working with Tyler, even though it might get me in trouble? Please tell me I'm not losing my mind. Moments later, Sabrina replied, No, you're not crazy. You just have a huge heart. We'll figure this out. I'm here for you. Chloe felt tears prick her eyes. Tapping out a grateful thanks, she put the phone aside. The day had been rough, but at least she wasn't alone. She reminded herself that this was only a roadblock, albeit a sizable one. Tomorrow, she'd head back to the hospital with her head high, determined not to let Marcus or anyone else crush her spirit. 2 weeks later, the tension continued brewing around the hospital corridors. Marcus's review of the empathy training program moved slowly, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty among staff who participated. Chloe noticed that even Sabrina, usually upbeat, had grown quieter. Dr. Harris tried to reassure everyone, but there was no denying the weight of administrative scrutiny. Yet amid this uncertainty, Chloe made a small breakthrough. One evening, she sat in the staff lounge with Dr. Harris, who looked over a list she'd created. A proposal for a community clinic day where volunteer medical staff would offer basic health screenings free of charge. The idea was to build good PR for the hospital while genuinely helping uninsured or low-income community members. Dr. Harris scanned the document, nodding. "This is solid, Chloe. You've detailed the staffing needs, budget for supplies, and potential partnerships with local vendors. Exactly the kind of pilot program that could demonstrate the hospital's commitment to caring for the underserved." She felt a spark of pride. "I was thinking, if we can prove something like this works, maybe it would quell Marcus's concerns. He's all about finances, but a well-publicized event might bring positive coverage." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "We'll need the board's approval, but I'll set up a meeting with them, pitch it as an extension of our empathy training." The notion that her small proposal might carry enough weight to influence the hospital's decision-makers filled Chloe with cautious optimism. It was also a potential opening to tie in Tyler's nascent foundation. If the hospital saw results, maybe they'd be more receptive to outside partnerships. She kept that thought to herself for the time being, focusing on the immediate hurdle. In the following days, she and Dr. Harris refined the proposal, adjusting numbers and clarifying roles. Word began to spread quietly among supportive colleagues, including Sabrina, who offered to help with the volunteer schedule. Even Lisbeth, usually stern and inflexible, seemed intrigued by the concept. The day of the board presentation arrived. It was an unseasonably chilly morning. The skies over Chicago cloudy and grey. Chloe stood outside the boardroom, smoothing the wrinkles in her navy blue slacks. She clutched a folder of printouts so tightly her knuckles turned white. Dr. Harris gave her a reassuring nod. They entered to find half a dozen board members seated around a gleaming mahogany table. Among them was Marcus Doherty, arms folded, expression unreadable. Chloe inhaled and began her presentation, taking pains to speak calmly and clearly about the benefits of a community clinic event. She highlighted improved hospital reputation, possible future grants, and, of course, the moral imperative to aid those who couldn't afford medical care. As she spoke, she sensed Dr. Harris's silent encouragement by her side. Once she finished, there was a brief moment of stillness before an older woman on the board, Ms. Farnsworth, broke the silence. "This is quite thorough," Ms. Farnsworth said, flipping through the proposal. "I appreciate the financial details. Have you considered partnership with local pharmacies or businesses for sponsorships? That might reduce overhead." Chloe nodded eagerly. "Yes, we have a preliminary list of potential partners who are interested in community engagement. We could also involve city council members to show government support." One of the other board members, a silver-haired man named Mr. Lang, leaned forward. "I like the concept. It aligns with our strategic goal of community outreach. The question is, do we have the staff capacity to handle an event like this without affecting normal operations?" Dr. Harris fielded that question. "We plan to use volunteers and schedule it on a Saturday when the hospital is typically less crowded. We'd still have full coverage on essential units." A hum of discussion followed, some board members nodding in agreement. Chloe spotted Marcus out of the corner of her eye, skimming the last page of the proposal. He said nothing for several minutes, until Ms. Farnsworth nudged him. "Marcus, any thoughts?" He looked up, giving Chloe a cool once-over. "It's well planned, I'll admit that. My primary concern is whether we're setting a precedent for unfunded services." Dr. Harris responded immediately. "We'll monitor costs closely. Besides, a single community clinic day won't bankrupt us. Marcus paused, then let out a measured breath. All right, as a pilot program, I can support it. But let's be clear, any overages or negative press, and we might have to pull back. A subtle relief coursed through Chloe, and Dr. Harris offered a small smile. The board voted, and with a clear majority, the community clinic event was approved for a trial run next month. While not an outright victory on all fronts, it was a step toward demonstrating the tangible value of compassionate initiatives. After the meeting, Dr. Harris gave Chloe a congratulatory pat on the shoulder. "You did great," she managed a grin that teetered on the edge of laughter. "I can't believe it. I was so scared Marcus would shut it down." "Seems like he's softened for now," Dr. Harris remarked, casting a wary glance at the finance director leaving the room. "But we'll remain vigilant." Though small, this triumph ignited hope in Chloe's heart. If she could pull off this clinic day successfully, it might pave the way for bigger ambitions. Buoyed by the moment, she resolved to keep refining ideas with Tyler, confident that her hospital colleagues and the board would one day welcome the partnership she was helping create. Chloe left the board meeting with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in months. This sense of accomplishment even outweighed her typical post-shift exhaustion. As she navigated the bustling hospital corridors, staff members she recognized stopped to ask about the presentation. She answered with cautious optimism. Yes, it had been approved, and yes, they'd need volunteers soon. During her break, she slipped away to the seldom-used family waiting room on the 4th floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Chicago, the skyline etched against a pale afternoon sky. She sank into a worn armchair, letting her eyes drift across the skyscrapers. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, a mixture of relief and anticipation. Reaching for her phone, she composed a text to Tyler. "The board approved our community clinic idea at the hospital. This might open the door for future collaborations. I'll keep you posted on any next steps." His reply was almost instant. "That's fantastic, Chloe. Let's talk soon. I have more ideas on how to tie this into our broader vision." Feeling a renewed surge of energy, she returned to her shift with a smile playing at her lips. The hours passed in a flurry of patient checkups, medication rounds, and charting. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of Marcus Dougherty or overheard his terse conversations about budgets. Yet, for once, he didn't corner her. Maybe he realized her clinic proposal was beneficial for the hospital's public image. Later that evening, she headed to Dr. Harris's office, hoping to discuss how they'd coordinate staff sign-ups for the event. She found him standing behind his cluttered desk, flipping through a stack of forms. When he saw her, he beckoned her in, closing the door behind her. "Great news about the clinic day," he began, eyes crinkling with approval. "But we need to finalize volunteer roles ASAP." She nodded, pulling up her phone's notes. "Sabrina said she'd assist with sign-ups, and 2 of our newer nurses are on board. That still leaves us short for pediatric support. Maybe we can reach out to the resident pediatrician." "Good idea," Dr. Harris agreed, jotting a note. Then he glanced up. "And Chloe, thank you for taking the lead on this. I know it's a lot, especially with your other obligations." A flicker of uncertainty passed through her. She wondered how much he suspected about her ongoing talks with Tyler. Should she share everything with him? For now, she decided not to. She needed a stronger foundation before revealing that she was helping orchestrate a potential non-profit outside the hospital's umbrella. "You're welcome," she said simply. "I'm just glad we can do something tangible for people who need it." He gave a thoughtful nod. "Make sure you pace yourself. You can't save the world in one event, though I admire your spirit." Leaving his office, Chloe wandered down the hallway, lost in thought. The day's small victory had ignited a deeper resolve within her. This was just the beginning, and she wanted to prove, to herself, to Tyler, and maybe even to Marcus, that compassionate care could flourish within a traditional healthcare framework. Her phone vibrated in her pocket with another text from Tyler. "Any chance you're free tomorrow? I'd love to walk you through the first draft of the Foundation's mission statement." Her stomach did a small flip. She had the afternoon off. Biting her lip, she typed a quick response. "I can meet around 2 p.m. Where?" He proposed a cafe near the hospital, and she agreed. Though part of her still worried about being seen publicly with him, especially if Marcus or any other administrative hawk was around, she also felt a tug of longing to push forward. The next day, when her shift ended around noon, she hurried home to change out of her scrubs, nerves humming in anticipation. 2 hours later, she arrived at the cafe, a cozy spot with exposed brick and large windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Tyler was already there, seated at a table by the window, a laptop open before him. Seeing her, he stood, his smile warm and earnest. She took a seat, dropping her bag on the chair beside her. "So, you have a draft mission statement?" she asked, trying to suppress her grin. He nodded, tapping a few keys on his laptop. "I've been thinking about the Foundation's core goal, providing accessible healthcare, especially for those who fall through the cracks of insurance and income-based assistance. But the wording needs your touch." He swiveled the screen so she could read it. "Our mission is to bridge gaps in healthcare by supporting community clinics, preventive care programs, and patient advocacy initiatives, ensuring no one is denied basic medical attention due to financial constraints." Chloe felt a flutter in her chest. It was like reading a blueprint for her lifelong dream. She glanced at him. "This is wonderful. It's concise, it's direct, and it targets exactly what people need." A hint of relief passed over his face. "Good. Now, I'd like your suggestions on how to approach local partnerships. Do we start with small clinics first, or aim big and try to open our own facility?" She mulled it over. "That depends on timing and resources, also on whether we can get buy-in from existing hospitals, or if we need to go independent. We can test the waters with the clinic day at my hospital. If that goes well, it might become a model for expansions." For the next hour, they jotted down potential steps, forging partnerships with local pharmacies for discounted medications, establishing a volunteer pool of medical professionals, and even researching grant opportunities for long-term sustainability. Every so often, Chloe sensed Tyler's gaze drifting from the screen to rest on her, as though in quiet gratitude for her input. By the time they finished, late afternoon sunlight bathed the cafe in a soothing glow. Tyler closed his laptop with a gentle click, smiling. "Thank you, Chloe. I know this is extra work on top of your full-time job, but your insights are invaluable." Her heart felt full, a rare sense of alignment between her aspirations and reality. "We're building something important. I just hope I can manage all of it without risking my job." He folded his hands on the table. "We'll stay discreet until we're fully ready. If your hospital sees the benefit, maybe they'll even partner with us someday. It doesn't have to be a conflict." She nodded, optimism blooming in her chest. Indeed, she was more determined than ever to bring this vision to life, no matter the obstacles. Yet as she rose to leave, a flicker of caution kept her grounded. She knew that, just beyond this moment of shared vision, new challenges awaited. Marcus's suspicions, the demands of the upcoming clinic day, and her financial anxieties were all still there, pressing in from the edges. But for now, she would hold on to this moment, this promise of what could be, and let it carry her forward through whatever trials lay on the horizon. The day of the much-anticipated community clinic finally arrived. Chloe Watson woke before sunrise. pulled on comfortable jeans and a simple blue polo shirt embroidered with the Central Hospital logo, and gathered a mountain of supplies into her aging sedan. The morning air was unseasonably warm for Chicago, and her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and tension as she drove toward the makeshift venue, a large gymnasium adjacent to a local church. By 6:30 in the morning, volunteers were already bustling about, nurses unfurling folding tables, medical assistants stacking boxes of syringes and blood pressure cuffs, and a few off-duty doctors studying the layout. Dr. Harris stood at the entrance with Sabrina, double-checking the sign-in sheets. The plan was to offer basic screenings and consultations, blood pressure checks, glucose tests, free flu shots, and referrals for more serious issues. If all went well, this would showcase how a single-day outreach event could change lives. Chloe fought a swirl of nerves in her stomach. She reminded herself that this had been her idea, an initiative greenlit by the hospital board, albeit somewhat grudgingly, and championed by Dr. Harris. Marcus Dougherty had kept notably silent since granting reluctant approval. She half expected him to show up just to criticize every detail, but so far there was no sign of him. By 8 o'clock, the first attendees arrived, an elderly man on a walker, a young mother with a toddler in tow, and a handful of others clearly anxious about medical costs. Chloe greeted each person with a warm smile, directing them to different stations where volunteers waited to help. Many wore tired but hopeful expressions. For some, this was their first professional checkup in years. Sabrina sidled over, handing Chloe a tablet loaded with digital forms. "We're already busier than we expected," she whispered, sounding both exhilarated and overwhelmed. "We might run out of flu shots if this pace keeps up." "That's actually a good problem," Chloe murmured back. "If we prove there's enough demand, maybe next time we can request double the supplies. Also, Doctor, Harris is talking to a local pharmacy about donating extra vaccines." Sabrina gave an encouraging nod, then hurried off to help a frail woman who stood uncertainly by the door. Chloe pressed on, her heart lifting at the sense of genuine service filling the gym. Everywhere she looked, volunteers were listening patiently, taking vitals and offering reassurance. Yet, as midday approached, Chloe realized a subtle apprehension nagged at her. Tyler hadn't shown up. Weeks earlier, he had talked about attending, nothing official, but enough to make her believe he might quietly observe or even volunteer. They had spent hours planning philanthropic goals together, brainstorming ways to expand outreach. Now that a real event was underway, she expected at least a text or phone call. She tried to shrug it off. There were 100 reasons he could be absent. Still, her eyes kept darting toward the doors, half hoping to see him slip inside with that thoughtful smile she'd come to know. At one point, she ducked into a makeshift break area behind a row of stacked chairs. Her phone showed no missed calls. Feeling a stab of worry, she shot Tyler a quick message. "Hey, clinic is going strong. Wish you could see this. Let me know you're okay." A minute passed, then 2. No reply. Returning to the main floor, she forced herself to focus on the work at hand. By late afternoon, the turnout had exceeded their projections. The mood among volunteers remained high, but a sense of weariness seeped in. Patients still lined up, some with serious complaints that needed follow-up appointments or hospital transfers. Chloe's feet ached, yet each new person's gratitude fueled her perseverance. Amid the controlled chaos, Marcus Dougherty finally appeared. He surveyed the scene with a critical eye, suit jacket draped over one arm. Chloe's stomach twisted as he approached the triage station she oversaw. For a moment, he observed a nurse measuring a woman's blood pressure. The patient looked visibly relieved to be getting some care. Marcus's gaze flickered with something like surprise, but his expression remained guarded. "You're getting a bigger crowd than I expected," he commented, folding his arms. Chloe offered a polite nod. Yes, sir. People really need these services. If anything, we could use more staff next time. He scanned the activity. I'll admit, it appears well coordinated. We'll see the final numbers, of course, the cost of supplies, the labor hours. The board will want a detailed report. Of course, Chloe said, forcing a measured tone. I'll have it ready. Marcus gave a curt nod before drifting away to speak with Dr. Harris. She watched him go, uncertain whether his subdued response was good or bad. At least he didn't shut it down on the spot. Hours later, the clinic wound down. Patients departed with pamphlets, appointment slips, and in many cases, new hope for their health. Volunteers finally began packing up tables and disposing of medical waste containers. As Chloe helped stack chairs, she glanced at her phone again. Still no word from Tyler. She stepped outside, breathing in the cooler evening air, and spotted Dr. Harris leaning against a pillar, looking spent but content. He caught her eye and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. "This was a success." Chloe nodded, appreciating the moment. "Yeah, I just wish Tyler could have seen it." Dr. Harris arched a curious brow. He knew enough about Tyler to grasp what his absence might signify. After a pause, he said, "Don't let it overshadow what you achieved today." She offered a faint smile in return. As darkness settled over the parking lot, Chloe felt torn between pride in the day's accomplishments and an unsettling worry that Tyler's silence meant trouble. The sense of unity she had felt earlier gave way to an unspoken tension. While the clinic showcased a shining example of empathy and action, she couldn't ignore the storm brewing just beyond her sight, one that might test her convictions more fiercely than any event so far. In the days following the clinic, Chloe found herself in a haze of exhaustion. She pored over attendance logs, budgeting notes, and post-event surveys, compiling data for the hospital board's review. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Over 200 individuals had received crucial screenings, and local news outlets praised Central Hospital for its compassionate outreach. Even Marcus Doherty seemed temporarily appeased. Yet, as Chloe organized spreadsheets on her laptop one evening, seated at her small dining table, her mind kept drifting to Tyler's unexplained absence. She tapped her phone, checking messages again. Nothing. For 4 days now, he hadn't replied. She grew restless, replaying their last conversation in her head. He'd been excited about the Foundation's mission statement, discussing next steps. Then, he simply vanished. A glimmer of doubt began to fester. Was she naive to think they had developed a true partnership, maybe even a budding friendship that teetered on something deeper? She thought back to the nights when they brainstormed ways to tackle healthcare inequities, how his eyes lit up whenever they stumbled upon a promising idea. Now, that spark felt distant, replaced by a hollow silence. Concern gnawed at her so strongly that she dialed his number again. As before, it went straight to voicemail. She left a short, carefully phrased message. "Tyler, it's Chloe. I'm worried. If you get this, please let me know you're all right." Her own voice sounded foreign to her ears, laced with vulnerability. She ended the call feeling more unsettled than before. Hoping for distraction, she decided to visit her mother, Marjorie Watson, who lived an hour's drive away in a small suburban neighborhood. Her mother had been diagnosed with chronic rheumatoid arthritis a year ago, and Chloe often felt guilty for not seeing her more. The pressure of work and bills, and now this new philanthropic endeavor, had swallowed much of her free time. Maybe a bit of family warmth could ease her racing thoughts. She arrived to find Marjorie propped in her recliner, knitting a blanket in soft pastel yarn. Despite her frailty, she greeted Chloe with a radiant smile. "My goodness, you look skinny," she teased, setting the knitting aside. "Are those hospital shifts starving you?" Chloe offered a quick hug. I'm fine, Mum. Just busy. We held a big clinic last week, helped a lot of people who couldn't afford care. Marjorie's eyes lit with pride. That's my girl. You were always the one to bring strays home, whether it was a sick cat or a friend who needed a meal. They settled in, chatting about mundane things, the neighbor's barking dog, a favorite TV show, the rising cost of groceries. Eventually, though, Marjorie's perceptive gaze shifted. You seem worried. Is it the hospital or money? Chloe considered deflecting, but decided she needed an outlet. It's complicated, she admitted, recounting how she'd helped a man named Tyler, who turned out to have significant resources and a deep desire to improve healthcare for those in need. She told her mother how they'd formed a unique partnership, then mentioned his sudden disappearance. Marjorie mused. When people vanish, it's often because they're overwhelmed or scared. Are you sure he didn't leave any explanation? Nothing, Chloe said, frustration seeping into her voice. I keep wondering if something happened to him or if he changed his mind about everything. Her mother patted her hand. Give it a little time. Sometimes men, people in general, have to sort through their own turmoils before they can move forward. Just don't assume you did something wrong. After a light dinner, Chloe kissed her mother goodnight, promising to visit more often. Driving back to her apartment under the glow of streetlights, she mulled over Marjorie's words. She recognized a kernel of truth in them. Tyler had hinted many times that he was dealing with grief and guilt from losing his friend. Perhaps he'd retreated into that dark space again. Yet the uncertainty weighed heavily. She returned home to her tiny apartment, flicking on the single lamp in her living room. The place felt lonelier than ever. Collapsing onto her couch, she stared at the blank television screen, mind restless. She scrolled through old texts from Tyler, reading snippets of their enthusiastic plans, mobile clinics, partnerships with local pharmacies, scholarships for underprivileged students. It was all so hopeful. Now, with no sign of him, she couldn't help but question her own judgment. Had she been too quick to trust, too eager to latch onto a vision because it offered her an escape from the confines of hospital bureaucracy and her endless debt? She hated how powerless she felt in the face of his silence. Sighing, she set her phone aside, forcing her thoughts to the next day's shift schedule. Work might be her only solace right now, a place where she could channel her compassion without waiting for answers. Yet a nagging sense of loss followed her to bed, its presence a reminder that she might have mistaken a fleeting connection for something more substantial, and that her well-meant faith in Tyler could be on shaky ground indeed. A full week crept by with no word from Tyler. The late summer heat had begun to yield to cooler breezes, signaling the approach of autumn. Inside Central Hospital, the usual chaos of patient admissions and staff rotations carried on. Chloe tried to lose herself in the steady hum of her shift, dispensing medication, recording vitals, comforting anxious families. But she couldn't entirely shake the worry gnawing at her. She had just wrapped up a post-op check on a middle-aged woman recovering from gallbladder surgery when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Expecting another message from the hospital scheduling system, she almost ignored it, but a glance at the caller ID made her heart jolt. Unknown number. Hoping it might be Tyler, she ducked into a supply closet and quickly answered. "Hello," she whispered, leaning against a rack of bandages. "Chloe, this is Eric Stone. I'm Tyler's personal assistant." Confusion flickered through her. Tyler had never mentioned a personal assistant. "Oh, hi. Is everything okay?" "Is Tyler all right?" She realized her voice was trembling, her anxiety unraveling. There was a brief pause before Eric continued. "He asked me to contact you. Well, it's best you hear it from him. He'd like to meet at his office tomorrow afternoon, if you can make it." "His office?" she repeated, the phrase unsettling her. She pictured Tyler as a solitary figure, albeit with money, not someone who occupied a formal corporate environment. All right, could you give me an address? When Eric provided the details, Chloe recognized the high-rise building in Chicago's financial district, far from the philanthropic circles she'd imagined. Her pulse quickened. Who exactly was Tyler Jenkins? That evening, she confided in Sabrina, who met her for a hurried coffee break in the hospital's courtyard. Streetlights illuminated the sidewalk, casting long shadows. Sabrina leaned forward, expression guarded. A personal assistant and a fancy office. Are you sure you want to walk into that alone? Chloe exhaled. I need answers. If something serious happened, or if he's been hiding the scale of his life, I'd rather know the truth than keep guessing. The next day, she left the hospital after her early shift and took a train downtown. Her reflection in the window showed apprehension etched across her face. She wore a modest blouse and slacks, appropriate enough but hardly business attire for a meeting in a glass tower that screamed wealth and power. Still, she trudged on, determined to see this through. The address led her to a sleek building of steel and tinted windows. A doorman directed her to the 34th floor. Riding the elevator up, she felt each passing level heighten the swirl of her emotions. Finally, the doors slid open onto a lobby lined with polished marble and contemporary art. A receptionist sat behind a gleaming desk, greeting Chloe by name, then ushering her down a corridor. At the end waited an expansive office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline. It was modern and minimalist, every piece of furniture meticulously placed. Tyler stood near a curved window, speaking quietly to a suited man with graying hair, presumably Eric Stone. When Chloe entered, Tyler's gaze snapped to her, and he excused the assistant with a nod. She hardly recognized him. Gone was the unassuming figure in casual clothes. He wore a tailored navy suit that accentuated his lean frame, his hair styled carefully. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the dissonance between this scene and the man she'd tended to in a hospital bed weeks ago. "Chloe," he said softly, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed. I was worried about you." He gestured for her to sit on a plush leather chair. "I'm sorry for vanishing. I had to handle some urgent issues with my company. There were complications I didn't see coming." Chloe settled, trying to steady her voice. "Your company?" He cast a glance around the spacious office, sighing. "Yes. Jenkins Tech Solutions. We provide software platforms for corporate clients. It was co-founded by me and the friend I lost, a friend who kept me grounded. After he passed, I hit a wall and basically walked away from it all. That's when I ended up on the street." Heart pounding, Chloe leaned forward. "I knew you had resources, but I didn't realize that I'm a CEO," he finished, managing a wry smile. "I wasn't trying to deceive you, I just needed clarity. Then, after we started planning the foundation, some internal crises forced me to return to the helm. I'm sorry I disappeared without warning." She tried to absorb it. "But your assistant called you Mr. Jenkins like I'm the boss." He nodded. "Yes, legally and publicly. I've always been. I was just running from it. Now I've had to step back in. A major partner threatened to pull funding if I didn't take over daily operations again." Anger, relief, and a sense of betrayal mingled within her. "Why not at least text me? I spent days thinking the worst." Regret filled his eyes. "I know I messed up. This all happened so fast. Lawyers, board members, I barely slept. Still, you're right. I should have reached out." She exhaled, torn between empathy for his situation and frustration at the secrecy. "So, what happens now? All the plans we made for the foundation, was that just a passing idea?" "Not at all." He stepped closer, voice earnest. If anything, controlling my company again gives me more resources to invest, but it's also complicated. I'm under scrutiny. I have shareholders who want profit, not philanthropy. His hand hovered near hers on the armrest, as though seeking a reconnection she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Gazing into his face, Chloe felt her heart twist. She'd wanted to help him create a better world for patients in need. Now she realized the scale of the obstacles and the potential for truly monumental change. "Chloe," Tyler said quietly, "I need you. Not just as a consultant, but as someone who believes in this mission. Please don't walk away." She sat there, struggling to find words. His plea tugged at her compassion, yet she also needed time to process how fully her life might shift if she entangled herself in a corporate empire. A world of stark suits, shareholders, and power plays was alien territory, and she had just begun forging a path in her beloved hospital setting. Looking out the massive window, Chloe saw the city stretched before her like an uncharted map. She remembered the vow she once made to help people who had no one else. Perhaps she needed to choose a road that terrified her if it meant saving countless lives. Still, the question lingered. Could she trust Tyler, this newly revealed CEO, to keep his promises and not vanish again? Could she trust herself not to lose her identity in his newly complex universe? With her heart pounding, Chloe realized her answer would shape both of their futures in ways she could barely fathom. Chloe left Tyler's office with a stack of documents under one arm, her emotions churning like a stormy sea. The corridor outside felt cavernous and impersonal. As the elevator descended, she couldn't help revisiting the contrast between the wealthy CEO she'd just confronted and the gentle, ragged stranger she'd saved on a rainy night. That same man now possessed the authority to pump millions into healthcare philanthropy, or to bury the idea under corporate red tape. Stepping onto the downtown sidewalk, she drew in a shaky breath and wove her way through the late afternoon crowd. The city's rush hour enveloped her in honking cars, briefcase-toting executives, and tourists snapping photos. Clutching Tyler's documents, she decided to find a quiet place to think. A few blocks away, she spotted a small park with a modest fountain and scattered benches. She sank onto one, letting the ambient chatter wash over her. The papers in her lap outlined Tyler's proposal to create a philanthropic branch of Jenkins Tech Solutions. In theory, this could streamline funding for the foundation they'd discussed. But scanning each page, she saw how complicated it truly was. Corporate liabilities, tax regulations, potential conflicts of interest. She wasn't just stepping into a philanthropic role, she'd be wading into the cutthroat realm of big business. She felt her phone vibrate. Expecting maybe a text from Tyler, she was surprised to see Dr. Harris's name. Hitting accept, she answered softly. "Hello." His calm, familiar voice greeted her. "Chloe, I just got word from the hospital board. They're thrilled about the clinic's success. They want to meet with you again to discuss future events." She managed a half smile. "That's great news. We can expand the concept, maybe even do monthly clinics." "That's what they're hoping." He paused, concern edging into his tone. "But I hear something off in your voice. Is everything okay?" She pressed her lips together, unsure how much to reveal. "I met with Tyler. Turned out he's the CEO of a major tech company, which I only partly realized. There's a lot going on. He wants me to help formalize a philanthropic wing. It's overwhelming." Dr. Harris took a moment to respond. "Change often is overwhelming. The question is, do you still believe in the mission, or has the scale of it scared you away?" She closed her eyes, recalling the hopeful faces at the clinic event. "I do believe in it, but I'm afraid I'm out of my depth. And what if Tyler disappears again or gets pulled away by corporate demands?" I have my patients, my mother, and my debts. I can't gamble my entire life on a dream." His voice softened. "You don't have to gamble alone. If you proceed carefully, you might find a balance between your hospital role and collaborating with Tyler. Also, I'd be happy to provide a referral, someone with experience in non-profit health administration who can guide you." A flicker of gratitude rose in her chest. "That might help." "Thank you." After the call, Chloe sat there, phone in hand, fighting a fresh wave of uncertainty. She considered Sabrina's unwavering support, Dr. Harris's mentorship, her mother's gentle encouragement. Each voice nudged her forward, yet a knot of fear refused to loosen in her belly. She spent the following days juggling hospital shifts with late-night review of Tyler's documents. Occasionally they texted, brief updates on legal progress, personal apologies from him. He offered to arrange a sit-down with Jenkins Tech's board members, but she wasn't sure she was ready for that. Instead, she pored over every clause and bullet point, determined not to be naive a second time. One evening, as she finished her shift, Sabrina pulled her aside near the nurses' station. "How are you holding up?" her friend asked, eyes filled with concern. Chloe shrugged. "I'm managing. Honestly, I'm just terrified of making a mistake. Tyler's world is so different from ours. They're talking about potential expansions, big partnerships, even constructing new facilities for low-income patients. I just don't want to get swept away." Sabrina squeezed her hand gently. "Remember the good this could do. If you need help or a second opinion, I'll do whatever I can. Don't let fear stop you from moving forward." Chloe felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thanks." "Really?" Outside the hospital, she leaned against a wall, letting the cool air brush her cheeks. In the quiet moment, she thought about the night she'd first met Tyler, trembling and vulnerable, and how her simple act of kindness had sparked a chain of events she could never have predicted. Perhaps it was fate or simple coincidence, but either way, she felt an undeniable pull toward making something meaningful out of it all. Yet the looming sense of crisis remained. She wasn't simply forging a new philanthropic path. She was deciding whether to trust a man whose life encompassed corporate power, hidden trauma, and yes, genuine empathy. Could she maintain her own identity, her humble nurse's heart, while stepping into that sphere? She took a deep breath, glancing at her phone. No new messages. Tomorrow, she planned to meet Dr. Harris for coffee and talk next steps for the hospital's outreach. Then she'd call Tyler and see if they could map out a realistic timetable, free from illusions. If they were to move forward, it had to be on solid ground, without any more last-minute surprises. Standing there under the muted glow of the hospital's exterior lights, Chloe felt her resolve crystallize. She would press on, albeit carefully. Her mother once told her that true faith wasn't the absence of doubt, but the courage to act despite it. In that moment, Chloe decided she would keep acting for as long as her spirit held out, praying that the path ahead, however fraught, would lead to a brighter horizon. A cool autumn wind stirred the leaves outside the downtown cafe, where Chloe had arranged to meet Tyler. The morning sky was a vibrant shade of blue, streaked with thin clouds, giving the city a crisp, energized feel. She arrived early, heart thudding, hoping for clarity, about the foundation, about his role in it, and about her own place in his suddenly intricate life. She spotted him at a corner table by a tall window overlooking the street, scanning his phone with a pensive expression. He wore a dark sweater rather than a suit jacket this time, as if bridging the gap between corporate formality and the down-to-earth demeanor she'd grown fond of. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, offering a hesitant smile. "Hey," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. "Thanks for coming." Chloe nodded, taking a seat. "Morning. I brought some notes," she said, patting a slim folder in her bag. Financial charts for the philanthropic branch, plus a draft timeline for how we might partner with existing free clinics. Tyler looked relieved. Perfect. I, also wanted to talk about something else. Something more personal. Her stomach fluttered. She took a careful breath. All right. A server arrived, and they ordered coffee. Once alone again, Tyler leaned forward, resting his forearms on the wooden table. I know things have been chaotic lately, he began, voice low. My life is complicated, but it hasn't changed how I feel about what we're doing, or about you. Chloe's cheeks warmed. Tyler, I admire your commitment to helping people, but let's be realistic. You're juggling a high-powered company, a philanthropic vision, and whatever this is between us. He studied her face. That's exactly it. I'm done separating the parts of my life. Before I walked away from Jenkins Tech, I felt empty. Now, despite the headaches, I see a purpose, merging who I am with what I can do for the world. She sipped her coffee, heart pounding. And where do I fit into that? He inhaled, gaze flicking momentarily to the window. You fit in every possible way, if you'll have me. I want to build this foundation, yes, but I also want a future, with you. Her eyes widened, breath catching in her throat. Tyler, let me explain, he said gently. When I was lost, you showed me genuine kindness and reminded me what life could be like if I actually cared about people, truly cared. Since then, my feelings for you have grown deeper than I ever expected. I want to share not just this project, but my entire life with you. A surge of conflicting emotions rippled through Chloe. Her first instinct was to protest that it was all too fast. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of kinship that had formed between them, forged by compassion and aligned dreams. She swallowed hard. You're talking like... He reached into his sweater pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. The sight of it made her heart hammer wildly. Opening it, he revealed a simple but elegant diamond ring. Will you marry me? He asked quietly. I know this might seem sudden, but I've never been more certain of anything. You're the reason I came back to myself. Chloe's pulse roared in her ears. She glanced at the ring, then at Tyler's earnest expression. Memories of his disappearance and the stress of the last few weeks flooded her mind. Are you sure you're not confusing gratitude with... He gently set the ring on the table, covering her hand with his. I won't pretend I have everything figured out, but if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that I love you, Chloe, for who you are, caring, brave, and unwavering. Your compassion saved me. I want to spend my life building something beautiful with you. She felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. Flashes of all the obstacles ahead bombarded her. The hospital's reaction, Marcus's scrutiny, her own debts, the possible skepticism from colleagues who might see this as a fairy tale. But in Tyler's gaze, she sensed genuine devotion and a willingness to face the storm together. She began, words failing. Her emotions tangled in a knot of joy, fear, and disbelief. She could see the reflection of the ring's diamond catching the sunlight, a promise of a future she'd scarcely dared to imagine. There was no denying her feelings for him had grown too, but was she ready to link her life so tightly with a man whose world felt miles away from her modest apartment and night shifts? She curled her hand around his. Tyler, I need time. This is huge. I do care about you, deeply, but I can't jump into marriage without making sure we both understand each other completely. His shoulders sagged in a mix of relief and disappointment. I get it. I won't pressure you for an immediate answer. Just know my heart is in this, and I'm ready whenever you are. She nodded, tears brimming as she closed the ring box gently. Thank you for asking and for giving me space. I'll need it. They sat there quietly, hands intertwined on the table, the cafe's bustle whirling around them unheeded. Chloe's mind raced with possibilities, some terrifying, some thrilling. She knew that this was more than a mere question of marriage. It was about whether she could trust Tyler's world not to shatter hers. Yet a fragile hope glimmered all the same. Maybe this daring proposal could unite two people driven by compassion and bring help to countless lives in need. Chloe Watson's mind raced in the days following Tyler's marriage proposal. She worked her usual hospital shifts, which had grown increasingly hectic as autumn settled over Chicago, bringing with it a surge in flu cases and a general influx of patients. Despite the endless tasks, monitoring vitals, comforting families, updating charts, her thoughts invariably drifted to Tyler and that small velvet box he'd offered her in the cafe. She felt both invigorated and vulnerable. Whenever a lull appeared in her routine, she pictured the ring's diamond catching the light, illuminating a future she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Yet a quiet undercurrent of hope took hold in her chest, an acknowledgement that maybe love and purpose could coexist. Late one evening, Dr. Harris caught her in the hallway, a new sense of gravity in his eyes. "Chloe, you look distracted," he observed gently, guiding her aside so they wouldn't block the corridor. "Something on your mind?" She hesitated, then decided she needed someone's perspective. Carefully, she explained the situation, how Tyler had poured his heart out and asked her to marry him. Dr. Harris listened attentively, letting her spill the swirl of emotions she'd held inside. When she finished, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I'm surprised, but not entirely. Anyone who sees you two together notices the genuine connection. The question is, are you ready for such a leap?" A wave of conflicting feelings washed over her. "That's what I can't answer," she admitted. "I want to say yes, but it's not just about romance. We'd be merging our lives and his resources and my hospital career. I'm worried I'll lose myself or disappoint him." He offered a half smile. "You've never struck me as someone who would get lost in anyone's shadow, no matter how big. Still, it's wise to be cautious. You've built your life around helping people on a personal level. Tyler lives in a world of grand gestures. If you do this, you need to ensure that your core values remain intact." She nodded, feeling momentarily steadied by his calm. "I keep thinking about the foundation and all the potential good it could do. It's not a small dream, Dr. Harris. It's a massive undertaking." He gestured for her to walk with him. They passed through a hallway lined with photos of past hospital directors and paused in front of a framed dedication to a decades-old benefactor. "Large-scale visions can lead to real change," Dr. Harris mused. "But they're also a marathon, not a sprint. Stay true to the nurse who gave her own jacket to a stranger in the rain. That nurse is your compass." Chloe felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. That means a lot." Though buoyed by his words, she couldn't dispel the butterflies in her stomach. Each time her phone vibrated with a message from Tyler asking how her shift went or sending some new draft proposal for the Jenkins Tech philanthropic branch, she smiled, yet felt a tremor of apprehension. He wanted to move forward quickly, merging not only the foundation but also their personal lives. While part of her yearned for that unity, another part craved the safety of a slower pace. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, she sank into the worn couch in her apartment, cell phone in hand. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. She dialed her mother, Marjorie, who answered with a warm but tired greeting. "Mom," Chloe began softly, "Tyler proposed." She let the statement hang in the air. Marjorie's delighted gasp reached across the line. "My goodness, dear, that's wonderful, isn't it?" Chloe's sigh trembled. "It is. I just don't know if I'm rushing into something. I hardly know what it means to be part of his world. And the foundation, Mom, it's so big. I'm scared." Marjorie paused. "I won't pretend to understand the corporate side of things." But I do know you have a strong heart, and you've always found a way to do what's right. If that means moving forward with Tyler, then you'll figure it out together. If it's not right, you'll know soon enough. Don't let fear silence the joy you might find." After they hung up, Chloe pressed the phone to her chest, allowing a moment of quiet introspection. Her mother was right. Her decisions, however risky, would be guided by the same compassion she'd always shown. Maybe her fear was just an indicator that the stakes were real and the possibilities vast. She gazed around her modest living room, the single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls, and pictured the chaos of her past weeks. The community clinic, Tyler's confessions, Marcus's scrutiny, and that life-changing question. With each passing day, she realized she was neither the naive nurse nor the corporate outsider she once was. She had grown in ways she'd never imagined, stronger, but more uncertain too. Pulling a blanket over her legs, she scrolled through messages from Tyler, her heart swelling with gratitude for his steady reassurance. Yet she also recognized that she needed tangible proof that their paths could merge without one engulfing the other. She refused to abandon her career or the hands-on care she gave patients. If Tyler truly wanted her, it would mean embracing every part of her, including the nurse who thrived in the messy beauty of everyday acts of kindness. Closing her eyes, she let fatigue claim her. Tomorrow, she would face another day at Central Hospital, another slew of decisions about the foundation and the lingering uncertainty about her engagement. Despite the swirling questions, she felt a new resonance within her, an understanding that life could be both complicated and deeply fulfilling. Perhaps that resonance was enough for now, a guiding hum she could follow through whatever lay ahead. Early autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Chloe's childhood home, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. She had taken a rare weekend off from the hospital, determined to visit her mother, Marjorie, for a proper catch-up. Her mother's house smelled of baking bread, and the air felt cozy against the crisp day outside. Sitting at the kitchen table, Chloe wrapped her hands around a mug of hot tea. Her gaze swept over the well-worn chairs, the floral curtains her mother had sewn years ago, and the pictures on the walls, a younger Chloe in her high school graduation gown, Marjorie in a Teacher of the Year photo, and a lone snapshot of Chloe's father from back when she was too young to recall him clearly. "It's strange being here," Chloe said quietly, taking a sip of tea. "Everything's so familiar, yet I feel different." Marjorie settled across from her, her gentle smile conveying understanding. "That's what growth does. You see old places with new eyes. How is work, dear? And have you decided anything about Tyler's proposal?" Chloe felt the tension in her shoulders. "The hospital's good, even though budgets are tight. Dr. Harris and I are drafting another community clinic event for Christmas. As for Tyler, I'm still on the fence. He's wonderful, supportive, kind, and willing to put his resources where his heart is. But the sheer scale of his life..." She exhaled. Marjorie studied her for a moment. "I wish I could give you a simple answer. Perhaps you should ask yourself if you're hesitating because you doubt his sincerity or because you're afraid of losing your identity." That question lingered in the air. Chloe couldn't deny it. Her biggest fear was dissolving into Tyler's grand world and losing the nurse who found joy in small, daily acts of compassion. The thought of fancy galas, business meetings, and press conferences made her uneasy, but so did the idea of letting Tyler walk away. Later, they took a stroll around the neighborhood, the cool breeze carrying hints of fallen leaves. They passed by Chloe's old school, the library where she used to study in secret for hours. Each sight triggered a rush of memories, of dreams she once harbored about changing lives through healthcare, of naive ideas about traveling the world to offer medical aid. She paused in front of the school's chain-link fence, peering through at the empty playground. "I used to think I'd join Doctors Without Borders," she mused aloud. When I was a kid, I imagined myself in distant countries, treating malaria or helping in disaster zones. Marjorie, leaning on a cane, gently patted Chloe's shoulder. Your dreams were always big. Perhaps you just needed a different path to realize them. This philanthropic venture might let you help more people than you ever could alone. Chloe's mind flickered to Tyler's foundation plans, the possibility of partnering with local clinics, even eventually expanding internationally. In a way, it was the adult version of her childhood dream, albeit with more structure and complexity than she'd pictured at 13. When they arrived back home, Marjorie grew weary from the walk, so Chloe helped her settle into her recliner. Before leaving, Chloe kissed her mother's cheek and promised to keep in touch. Driving away, she felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and clarity. The weekend had reminded her of who she was at her core, a girl with a longing to heal others, now a woman who had stumbled upon a far greater calling than she ever imagined. On her route back to Chicago, she found herself suddenly dialing Tyler. He answered on the second ring, relief in his voice. Chloe, hey, everything okay? She switched to speakerphone, eyes on the road. I'm good, just left my mom's. I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten about your question. I'm still sorting things out. He paused. I'm here whenever you're ready. I promise I won't push, but I do have something else that might help clarify things for both of us. Would you be willing to tour a potential building site for the Foundation's pilot hospital wing? Nothing formal, just a look at what could be. Her heartbeat quickened. A building site. That sounded so tangible, so real. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how certain she felt. I'd like that. They agreed to meet in 2 days, leaving Chloe a bit breathless at the thought of seeing a physical space that might one day become a haven for those who couldn't afford traditional care. Even as her car merged onto the highway, the city skyline materializing in the distance, she sensed a new surge of conviction. She might still be caught between two worlds, the humble nurse's station and Tyler's powerful corporate realm, but for the first time, it felt like a bridge was forming. Perhaps she could bring her compassion to that bigger stage, weaving her childhood dreams into a modern reality. And maybe, in that process, she'd find her own sense of home, wherever life happened to take her next. Chloe stepped out of her car onto a vacant lot that stretched toward the horizon. The ground was mostly gravel, with tufts of grass growing sporadically, and an old chain-link fence encircled the property's perimeter. She took in the surroundings, a patch of empty land flanked by a few abandoned warehouses. A slight chill in the air reminded her that winter was just around the corner. Tyler was already there, pacing as he spoke with a woman in a suit. He wore a dark coat and looked more like the pensive, determined man she'd come to know than a distant corporate figurehead. When he spotted her, he halted his conversation and came forward. "Chloe," he said warmly, "I'm glad you could make it. This is Patricia Lee, our real estate consultant. She's been scouting properties for a potential clinic or small hospital wing." Patricia extended a hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Watson. Tyler's told me about your background, nursing, plus a passion for accessible healthcare." Chloe offered a polite smile. "I appreciate you taking the time. So, this is the site." She glanced around, trying to imagine a vibrant medical facility here amid the dust and cracked concrete. Patricia nodded, flipping through a tablet. "Yes. It's cheaper than other options closer to the main hospital district, but the location is central to several underserved neighborhoods. With enough renovation, it could become a combined outpatient clinic, mental health center, and maybe even a small surgical unit." Tyler watched Chloe's reaction carefully. "I know it doesn't look like much now, but I can picture families coming here for free or low-cost treatment, a training wing for medical interns, possibly even housing for rotating volunteers. The vision stirred something in Chloe. She walked a few steps onto the gravel, imagining waiting rooms, exam tables, lines of patients who would no longer have to endure long bus rides or the shame of turning up at an ER with no insurance. She glanced back at Tyler, a cautious spark in her eyes. "It could work," she murmured, "but it'll need a lot of funding and a strong partnership with local health organizations." Patricia nodded in agreement. "Precisely. And that's where the Jenkins Tech philanthropic branch could step in. Government grants would help too, if we align with the right community initiatives." Chloe's heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was no mere idea scrawled on a notebook page. It was becoming a tangible reality. She remembered Dr. Harris's words about pacing herself. "We have to do this with respect for the local community," she said, turning to Tyler. "Make sure we're not just swooping in like some savior complex." He offered a reassuring smile. "Agreed. We want partnerships, not paternalism. I'd like to invite local leaders too, get their input on what kind of services they need the most." Patricia excused herself to take a phone call, and Tyler guided Chloe closer to the fence. The city skyline loomed in the distance, stark against the pale sky. "I see you, scanning every detail," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Your practical perspective keeps me grounded." She managed a soft chuckle. "I've learned the difference between flashy ideas and actual sustainability. The hospital taught me that resources get wasted if you don't engage people on the ground." He breathed in the crisp air. "Speaking of the hospital, how are things there? I heard your last community clinic was a major success." She nodded. "We're planning a holiday version next month. Marcus still looms, but Dr. Harris keeps him at bay. Everyone's thrilled to see the improvement in patient outreach." Tyler's gaze shifted, the light in his eyes warming. "And how are you, personally? I realize I've thrown a lot at you these last few weeks. Proposals for the foundation and, well, the marriage proposal." Her cheeks tinged with color. "I've been thinking," she admitted, choosing her words with care. "I do have feelings for you, deep ones. But I've also realized something. Whether or not I say yes, we need to keep building this clinic and foundation. That's bigger than just us." He exhaled slowly, relief evident in his stance. "I couldn't agree more. Our bond goes beyond romance. It's about creating real change. If you say yes to the ring, I want it to be because you truly want that future, not just because you believe the work depends on it." She reached out and took his hand, giving a reassuring squeeze. "I promise, if I do commit, it'll be for both reasons, love and this shared mission." They lingered there, gazing out at the vacant lot. The possibility of transforming this barren space into a beacon of hope felt electrifying. Chloe realized that all her years of hands-on nursing had primed her for this moment. She understood how to meet human need at the most personal level, and now she had a partner determined to lift that compassion onto a grand stage. Eventually, Patricia rejoined them, phone conversation concluded. Together, they mapped out a basic timeline, discussing how soon renovations might begin if the purchase closed. Chloe threw in suggestions for community outreach, health fairs, local forums, even collaborations with the hospital where she still worked. At day's end, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, Chloe exchanged a final handshake with Patricia and walked back toward her car alongside Tyler. Each step felt lighter than the last, as though she was shedding the lingering remnants of doubt. In a matter of months, maybe even weeks, this could become more than a distant dream. It could be the place where she and Tyler and an entire community found a new beginning. Chloe Watson flipped through the final blueprints for the future clinic, her pulse quickening at every page. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and the holiday spirit hummed in the hospital corridors. Patients were greeted with festive decorations, and staff donned cheerful accessories. Amid the bustle, Chloe sat in a small conference room with Dr. Harris, Sabrina, and a handful of hospital board members eager to discuss the next community clinic event. Outside, snow flurries drifted past the windows, painting the city in shades of white. This meeting had a dual purpose: to plan the expanded holiday outreach and to share early updates on the philanthropic wing Tyler hoped to establish. Marcus Dougherty, perched at the end of the long table, eyed the sketches with measured curiosity, as though he was impressed despite himself. "Looks ambitious," he remarked, glancing at Chloe. "And you're telling me Jenkins Tech is willing to bankroll the initial construction?" Chloe nodded, keeping her tone steady. "Yes. Tyler Jenkins believes in forging a partnership, not just a donation. The hospital would help with staffing and administration, while his foundation covers overhead." Marcus rubbed his chin. "That might align well with our goals, especially if it reduces strain on our emergency rooms. We'd need a formal agreement to ensure compliance, of course." "Of course," Dr. Harris interjected, smiling in reassurance. "We'll draft a memorandum of understanding that benefits all parties." As the meeting wrapped up, Chloe exhaled, shoulders loosening with quiet triumph. Months earlier, she would have shied away from addressing someone like Marcus directly, but her drive to shape this new path bolstered her confidence. After the board members dispersed, Sabrina approached with a grin that crinkled her eyes. "Girl, I never thought I'd see the day when you and Marcus Dougherty sat politely discussing a philanthropic plan," she teased. "Guess miracles do happen." Chloe laughed softly. "Still holding my breath, but it's progress. Thanks for all your support." Sabrina gave her a playful nudge. "You deserve it. And by the way, the staff can't stop talking about how you might soon be Mrs. Jenkins. Are you going to spill the beans on that?" Heat rose to Chloe's cheeks. "I haven't decided anything formally. Tyler's waiting patiently, believe it or not." Sabrina teased. "Well, the moment you say yes, you know we're throwing you a big party in the break room." A short while later, Chloe was en route to Tyler's downtown office, the snow now thick enough to transform streets into a patchwork of slush and white. She arrived at the same towering building as before, but this time she navigated the polished lobby and elevator banks with a new sense of belonging. Entering his office, she found Tyler pacing near the floor-to-ceiling window. He turned, relief washing over his expression at the sight of her. "How did the hospital meeting go?" he asked, stepping forward. She set her bag down, a soft smile forming. "Better than I expected. Marcus had surprisingly few objections. We'll need a formal agreement, but Dr. Harris is helping with that." Tyler nodded, tension easing from his posture. "That's good. We can finalize the land purchase soon, then coordinate the design phase. I want you heavily involved in picking everything from floor plans to community programs." Chloe felt a flutter of excitement. "I'd love that. But it's all happening so fast. My head's spinning just thinking about the new clinic wing and all the patients we could serve." A quiet pause settled between them, each absorbing the magnitude of what they were embarking on. Tyler moved a step closer, gaze gentle. "Chloe, there's something I want to show you." He opened a drawer in his desk and retrieved the small velvet box she remembered all too well. This time, though, he held it out without opening it, almost like a question. She swallowed hard, emotions welling up. "Tyler, let me say this," he began, voice steady. "I meant every word when I proposed. I'm in no rush to corner you into marriage, but I also need you to know that my commitment, both to you and to this clinic, is absolute. I'm not leaving again. I'm not hiding anything. If you need more time, I'll wait. If you're ready, I'll be the happiest man in Chicago." She exhaled, heart pounding. For a moment, the world outside his office window faded, the swirling snow, the bustling city, the corporate boardrooms. What remained was the memory of their shared compassion and the unspoken promise that they could truly change lives together. Meeting his gaze, she placed her hand over his, feeling the familiar shape of the ring box beneath her palm. "Tyler, I've been scared of losing myself in all of this, but I realize now that what we're building honors exactly who I am. I'll never stop being a nurse who believes in small acts of kindness. You'll never stop being the man who found himself in that belief." He pressed his forehead lightly against hers, voice trembling with emotion. "So," she inhaled, eyes brimming with tears that danced between joy and awe. "Yes," she whispered, leaning in, her voice catching. "I will marry you. Let's build that clinic, that future together." Tyler's breath escaped in a gentle laugh, tears glistening in his own eyes. With unsteady hands, he opened the box and slipped the ring onto her finger. For a moment, neither spoke. It felt as though the entire city paused with them, suspended in the hush of possibility. The hush broke when her phone chimed with a text from Sabrina, probably about a patient or a scheduling change. They both laughed, reminded that real life continued swirling around them, but the next steps felt undeniably clearer. They would face Marcus's regulations, the intricacies of construction, and the new philanthropic responsibilities. They would keep tending to everyday patients who needed them. Through it all, they would stand side by side, each respecting the other's world while forging one of their own. Snow continued to fall beyond the window, draping the city in a soft blanket. As Tyler drew her into a tight embrace, Chloe felt a calm certainty settle within her. Love and compassion, she realized, weren't separate forces. Together, they could create something profoundly healing for themselves, for the hospital, and for the countless lives yet to be touched by their vision. And in that realization, she felt her heart soar. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.